30 minutes. Hi, and welcome to Empire Watch Weekly Live, where we break down weekly news from around the world through an anti-imperialist lens. Every week on Friday, 12 p.m. UTC, we will be challenging the mainstream media narrative and examine what's really going on behind the headlines and propaganda. I'm Ileana Chan. My co-host here is Sara Vivacqua.
Hi everyone, I'm Sara. Nice to meet you again. And now we have Matt Kennard. We have a guest today that doesn't need any introduction. It's Matt Kennard, journalist, author, investigative journalist. He co-founded DeclassifiedUK. You may have heard of this. And he's now working with Palestine Deep Dive. He's the author of Silent Coup, Irregular Army, The Racket, and has been featured in news Statesman, The Guardian, The Financial Times, openDemocracy, The Intercept. And I know, Matt, you are writing a new book. Welcome, Matt. We're extremely happy to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. Thanks for inviting
me. Star.
What's that?
The UK rising star of journalism.
Well, thank you.
Rising star, surely a star already. Welcome, Matt.
I'll take you.
Thank you for coming on my
That's all right.
So the format of this show, we usually do 2 top stories about what everyone is talking about. And today we're going to be doing the Japan and China tensions. And I'm going to put up the graphic here, but we're changing it around a little bit. But just so you know, here's what we usually do. We've covered Matt nicely there, but everyone is talking about Japan and China tensions, the COP30 corporate coup, ? And everyone should be talking about Epstein, Trump revelations, CELAC, and the top stories on our radar today's UK-US intelligence rift, BBC shock resignations, and calls for ICC indictment of British participation in the Gaza genocide. But since we have Matt here already, we're going to start with CELAC, and from there, and then we'll go backwards. Once Matt is sick of us and has left. So that's okay.
All good.
Okay,
Sounds
cool.
Good.
Okay, cool. And also, I just want to say thank you so much for the people watching. Last week, we could not see your comments because of some sort of weird feature on StreamYard. But this week, we will be looking at your comments. So please comment, say where you're from, and ask any questions you want to ask, because, we'll actually read them this while we're live. So, but first, let's go over the CELAC summit. The CELAC summit happened this past week, as you know. But to give a little bit of context before that, the U.S. has been military striking boats in the Caribbean as part of what Trump is calling the narco-terrorism situation. He's claiming that these boats are taking drugs from South America to the U.S. And I think, Sara, can you put up the thing about CNN. Sorry. So CNN is reporting that the U.S. military has killed 80 people in 20 strikes that have destroyed 21 boats as part of a campaign that Washington says is aimed at curtailing the flow of drugs into the United States. As a response, President Maduro has called on the CELAC summit to condemn militarization of the militarization of the Caribbean. As we can see here on that's the CNN report. Sorry. And then if we can show them the Orinoco Tribune article with President Maduro's letter, where he says, the principle at stake today is clear and decisive: the sovereignty of states and the free self-determination of peoples. Venezuela declares this with absolute clarity. It does not accept and will not accept any tutelage. We do not accept that under euphemisms such as security or the war on drugs, the old Monroe Doctrine be imposed, seeking to turn our America into a stage for invasions and regime change coup to steal our immense wealth and natural resources. I mean, that pretty much sums up everything there. Of course, in the closing remarks of this CELAC EU summit, they sidestepped U.S. military aggression and didn't really respond to the U.S. military bombardment in that area. Matt, any comments on that? I know you have a tweet up showing the U.S. military C-130J planes arriving in Curacao. Is that Curacao? On 20th of October. And they've been flying in that area ever since. That's 40 miles from Venezuela. So what are your current discourse? You know, if you want to talk about CELAC at all, but any of your takeaways from CELAC, but also the current discourse that Venezuela might be the next Vietnam.
Well, it's worth just saying that the US has it's over 25 years of trying to remove the government of Venezuela, the democratically elected government. Chavez was elected the first time in 1998, came into power the following year, and then there was a coup attempt in 2002, which was actually successful for a while. They took Chavez to an island, and he thought he was going to get killed or thrown out of the plane. And then there was a big uprising from the people in the barrios who were seeing the benefits of the mineral wealth that they had under their land for the first time in many, many generations. And they reversed that coup. But then the US went back to what it usually does, which is just use its front groups, like National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, and obviously CIA and other intelligence agencies as well, just massive subversion. And then they moved on. They couldn't get rid of Chavez, who was very popular. Then he died in 2013. And then there's been a massive sanctions regime imposed on Venezuela as well, which has devastated the economy. You know, the economy is in bad shape, and it's made it hard for them to sell oil. It's made inflation huge. It's made a massive migration crisis as well. And this is this is a tapestry of different methods and mechanisms that the US empire has to remove governments that are not doing what they're told and are not opening up their economies to being ransacked by the US corporate sector. But it hasn't worked up till now. And the final, in my analysis, that they don't prefer to use the military. But when they've tried everything and it hasn't worked to remove the leader or the movement that they don't want in power, they move to the military. And it seems like they're really pushing for war now. And they're talking about invasion or at least bombing strikes. And Pete Hegseth, the head of the Pentagon, said yesterday that he's launched Operation Southern Spear, which is going to be run by Southern Command, which is the US command structure, which covers the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean. And I imagine that it will involve strikes. I mean, it came out recently that Trump had told the CIA that they can operate within Venezuela. Obviously, we don't know what they're doing, but you know, the US has a history of assassination, definitely kidnapping presidents. So I think that this is their kind of their foreign policy goal. And you know, if you look at the people around Trump, like Marco Rubio, who's the Secretary of State, he's got a long history. He's like a right-wing Cuban descendant guy. You know, like the people in Miami that have been pushing for the removal of Chavez and Maduro for decades. They really want to get rid of the leadership of in Venezuela, and there's a reason for that. You know, it's got the largest proven oil reserves in the world. That is the reason they want to get it, and it's a huge strategic failure in terms of the U.S. empire. That the biggest oil deposits in the world are sitting underneath a country which is led by a government which is anti-imperialist. That is a nightmare for them. And interestingly, I think that part of the reason that it was allowed to happen, and not just Chavez in Venezuela, but the subsequent pink tide, you know, in Ecuador, Brazil, Argentina, was because that coup in 2002, that was the year before the invasion of Iraq. And then the invasion of Iraq, as we know, went very badly, went wrong for the US. They were there a lot longer. They had to do the surge. They had to put hundreds of thousands of troops that they didn't want to put there. And they took their eye off the ball. And that I really think that is why the pink tide was allowed to happen, because we all know the history of the smashing by the US empire of the liberation movements and democratic socialist movements and anti-imperialist movements in Latin America during the Cold War. But nothing ever changed when the Soviet Union was dissolved. They're still constantly working around the clock, but a lot of their focus had to be on the Middle East, which was in flames. And obviously that's changed a bit now. You know, they control Syria. Israel does a lot of their bombing for them. I think that they partly wanted to stop intervening so much in the Middle East so they can concentrate on their own backyard. And in fact, Hegseth, you know, he even mentioned when he made his announcement about Operation Southern Spear, he said, "This is our neighborhood and we'll protect it." And again, none of this is new. Even the pretext that they're using, which is obviously preposterous, you know, which is that this is about fighting narco terrorists or narco groups. This is a long history, and in fact picked up after the end of the Cold War, because they didn't need an excuse to go in to Latin America during the Cold War, because it was always the Soviet threat, even when it wasn't. You know, they used that with Allende. They said he was gonna ally with the Soviets, even though he wasn't a communist in that sense. But then they lost that excuse, and that's when the war on drugs really took off, and they used it as an excuse to position Drug Enforcement Administration people, so DEA, CIA, military, all over Latin America. And that's still up to this day the excuse that they use. And, you know, none of it is real. I've spent quite a lot of time in Bolivia, and in fact, Evo Morales kicked out the DEA in 2008, soon after 3 years after he became president. And cocoa production went down when the DEA were kicked out. The idea that the DEA is about stopping drug production is ridiculous, especially when the CIA is involved in drug running itself. So, but that's the same framework and the same propaganda is being put out about Venezuela. And you know, you mentioned that 80 people have been killed in 20 strikes. You know, it's very unlikely that any of them were even shipping drugs. And it's so obvious. You know, one good thing about Trump is that he doesn't actually base his policy, or he doesn't present his policies in the usual sort of niced up liberal propaganda way. He's much more honest about it. So and that makes it hard for allies like Britain, like you mentioned in the beginning about how Britain apparently is now saying it won't share intelligence, but with the Americans from that it's collecting in the Caribbean. Again, they wouldn't do that if that was a Democratic president who was doing the same thing but saying all the right things. You know, Trump's basically just like, this is our backyard, we can do what the hell we want. A lot of people are going to get killed. That's what he said. And then, sorry, I'll just finish with this. Like another example, which shows that this isn't just a Trump thing, is that Bush Senior, so the first Bush, who was president from 88 to 92, he invaded Panama in 1989, and removed the president, Manuel Noriega, who was previously a CIA asset for pretty much the whole of the 80s. He received millions of pounds from the CIA, and then they decided that they didn't like him anymore, and they invaded. He was taken and put in prison in the US, and then put in prison in France after that, and then died in prison in France. Oh no, sorry, he went back to Panama, but died in prison in Panama. And again, that was all done under the pretext that he was a narco drug runner, but he'd been doing exactly the same thing when he was on the CIA payroll. So it's all a massive excuse. I think that it's not going to be easy for them, because the Americans, although they run the most powerful empire in history, they're not very good at it. They can't win wars. Like, they can't win. They lost Iraq, Afghanistan. The Taliban's now in power after 20 years. That some people say they haven't won a war since Korea in the 50s. So I don't think they're prepared for what they will unleash in Venezuela.
Matt, you talked about the South Command. I want to share with everyone a video that speaks volume about the Monroe Doctrine, the classic one on Latin America. That's how Americans sees Latin America, and these are the explicit interests. This is Laura Richardson. She used to be the South Com, the main commander, the principal. She was the protagonist of White House diplomacy with guns. Let's see what she has to say about South America.
Rich resources and rare earth elements. You've got the lithium triangle, which is needed for technology today. 60% of the world's lithium is in the lithium triangle: Argentina, Bolivia, Chile. You just have the largest oil reserves, light sweet crude, discovered off of Guyana over a year ago. You have Venezuela's resources as well, with oil, copper, gold. China gets 36% of its food source from this region. We have the Amazon, lungs of the world. We have 31% of the world's fresh water in this region too.
Richardson es la responsable de uno de los comandos de combate que Estados Unidos tiene por el mundo, con más de 1,000 empleados focalizados en Centroamérica.
So she's saying she is responsible. She's the center, the brain of those commands that are listed that for South America, with over 1,000 employees.
Sudamérica y el Caribe.
Laura Richardson afirma abertamente que esses países são questão de segurança nacional.
So she openly states that all those Latin American countries are a national security matter for the USA.
Para os Estados Unidos e devem ser controlados para impedir a influência da China.
And should be controlled to avoid China's influence. And it's very interesting because Laura Richardson made a speech on the US Senate saying that they need to use the TCO, Transnational Crime Organizations, to put their foot there, to put their foot in Latin America. They should use those TCOs to say, let's do a collab with Latin America, and that's how we're going to infiltrate the Amazon, in strategic regions. But now, this is the classic stand. But Matt, I think there is an upgrade here with Trump. I don't think it's the same, because I want to know your thoughts. Trump is now using the Aliens Act, and he passed an executive order to upgrade those criminal organizations into terror organizations. It seems that Trump is upgrading the classic war on drugs, which is a geopolitical strategy for Latin America. You have different geopolitical strategies from the US empire, different faces, different masks. This is the one for Latin America. But now they are trying to say that Latin America drug cartels are terrorists. Can you explain to us what is the consequence, if you agree with me that there is an upgrade here and a substantial one, and what is the difference between the war on drugs and the war on terror? I would even say, is Venezuela the new Iraq?
Yeah, well, I agree. It's a different, the complexion of what Trump's doing is different, because he's just got no constraints. They don't care. And like, as you said, they cook up new legal justifications for doing what they're doing. But then that happened in Iraq as well. Look, with a torture program. You know, they called it. They had all these extensive and complex legal justifications for torture, which is unconstitutional. And they called it enhanced interrogation, but it's effectively what the CIA were doing during the war on terror on their black sites was was 100% torture, waterboarding, and completely illegal. But they did it anyway. So Trump is following in that line. He's more extreme and willing to do more reckless stuff. And that's why I think they haven't. But look, there's also his first term to look at what he did during his first term. Venezuela was a big priority as well, and he appointed Elliot Abrams, who is like this blood-soaked Washington insider who was actually convicted during the Iran-Contra scandal. He appointed him his point man for Venezuela, if you remember. And then, like a couple of months later, Leopoldo Lopez and Juan Guaido literally tried to start an armed uprising on the streets of Caracas. I don't know if you remember that footage of them on the motorway with their guns, and they're like, "We're going to take out the government." It was promoted by CNN. So he's tried that as well. But yeah, as you said, like it's a meld. When you said like, is it the war on terror? Is it war on drugs? None of those. They're just propaganda terms. Basically, they just use them as a justification to get a policy done, and the policy now is the removal of Maduro. Not because it's anything to do with drugs, but because he is not a part of the empire, and also sits on the oil that the US wants, which she said, right? She said, and this is how imperialism always works. It's like it's a resource-based thing, and it's about control. It's also about geopolitical control, but resources are the primary priority for the policymakers in Washington and London and Berlin and places like that. That's what they want: control of the resources and control. But the interesting thing about Venezuela is Chevron does work in Venezuela. It's one that got some of the major contracts. So, but they haven't got complete control, and that's what they want. But it is, I think Trump is different. Trump's different in that he's more reckless, and he doesn't care about nicing up what he's doing, which is it's good and bad. It's good for us because you can cleave away the whole of the liberal imperialist class because they can't use the usual propaganda. But obviously it's bad because it means the policies themselves are violent, and we might see an attack on Venezuela. And also, it won't stop with Venezuela. You know, if they're moving their priority to Latin America, they will go to other places too, like Colombia. Bolivia's been lost now, but places like Brazil, Cuba as well, obviously has been a massive obsession of Washington since the revolution in 1959. I think it's part of a strategic pivot back to their own backyard, as they say. And it's like you related to China, you know, and she mentioned China, Laura Richardson. If you go to Africa, they've kind of lost Africa to China. And China's type of power projection is much more Pacific, and it's much more economic. And like, for example, I've been to Africa and talked to people in governments and stuff, and they say, look, we're not under any illusion that the Chinese are here for charity. They want control and resources and stuff. But firstly, they do a lot of infrastructure for resources programs, so it builds up the country. Secondly, if the Chinese don't get a contract on the terms they want, they're just like, okay, fine, we'll move on to the next one. Whereas the US have a much more ideological way of doing things. Like, they'll be like, right, if you don't do what we tell you, we'll take you out. And Latin America, and also, they haven't lost. Sorry.
And also, I just like to point out that with China, you can negotiate different terms, and with the US, you can't. There's coercion and power involved. And I think another really important, because you've just hit upon my pet peeve, Matt, which was amazing. How long did it take? 25 minutes. Okay, good job. Well, it's just this idea, you know, I think it's a very colonial mentality that countries that are coming to treat you as an equal should be treating you instead with charity. I think that's a very much, as the global South rises and a new multilateral world emerges, that's not going to be acceptable anymore. It's like part of the propaganda of colonialism that they were ever in the global south for charity. They would never were. It was always a cover. So I think that sort of mentality will sort of fall away as the global south rises. But really good point on everything, as usual. I would say that I want to point out, though, that the US sanctions against Venezuela that resulted in the consequent economic decline that now we're looking at 70% poverty rate in Venezuela was under Obama in 2015. He instituted those US sanctions. So I think it's, again, like we're saying, Trump has a different flavor of imperialism. It's more overt, mask off type of thing. We can see him coming. The danger, of course, there is that when Overton window gets moved further to the right, like things are just acceptable now that they might not have been. And the benefit is that we see him coming. But of course, the other counter problem with that is that, you know, if a Democrat comes into office next term, will people go back to sleep? I mean, that's one of the issues. Although I just want to address because we have a question for you, Matt, here. Somebody is interested on everyone's view, but Matt/everyone view on Gustavo Petro, who was previously quite critical of Maduro. I think Petro is kind of an interesting, the president of Colombia, right? It's quite interesting figure right now because he's also in the crosshairs of this narco-terrorism and announced just recently that they will not be sharing intelligence with the US, which to me is quite funny in a way because they were put on the narco-terrorism list in September, and only now they're like, we're no longer going to be sharing intelligence, which is ironic. At the same time, it's not a given, right? There's a lot of US puppet states that have to do things that are not in their own self-interest. But yes, what's your opinion of Gustavo Petro?
I'm a fan of Petro. I think that, like you got to understand what he came into. Like they always called Colombia the Israel of Latin America. It was the most heavily controlled US satellite in Latin America for decades, you know. And interestingly, like to go back to the drug war, if you look what the US did there, the drug war is a terrorist war. Like, I don't know if you guys remember the fumigation campaigns that the US started doing in Colombia, and what they're called fumigation campaigns. But what that is just dropping loads and loads of defoliants and chemicals on vast swathes of Colombian territory. What right does the United States have to drop chemicals on vegetation that they don't like? And it was part of a war against FARC and all that kind of stuff as well, which is, again, goes back to that point about the drug war being completely different, the image of it being completely different to the reality. But and then obviously the civil war was brutal, and the US supported Plan Colombia, which was actually begun under Clinton. Was a major part of the empowering the paramilitary groups, and then they got into government under Alvaro Uribe, who was like linked to countless paramilitary groups that were carrying out awful atrocities. You know, at one point it was the most dangerous place in the world to be a trade unionist, Colombia, and they were there was complete lawlessness. I remember I went to Colombia to do a story about how Chiquita, the banana company, had they'd funded paramilitaries. It came out who were killing peasants who didn't want to give up their land, or trade unionists or dissidents against their operations. Anyway, they were taken to court in the US under the Alien Tort Statute, and we went to Colombia to talk to people who were like who had been victims of these paramilitaries. And I remember interviewing one woman, and this was when Uribe was in power, and she literally wouldn't. She was so scared she couldn't say his name. She was like, "I'm scared to even say his name." Like, and it's so different at odds. At that time, Colombia was being presented as this great, like, tourist destination, this developing economy, but it was a terror regime that basically you can just complete impunity. You can kill anyone you want. So in that context, having Petro come to power, who was like a Marxist revolutionary essentially, and also his deputy, who's amazing as well, Francia Marquez, who was like a maid, you know, an environmental activist, is pretty amazing. And the fact that I was like, they would have in a different time they would not have been allowed to get to power, but they have, and they managed to stay in power, which is even more impressive, because as you say, like with the intelligence sharing, one of the interesting things about how the world operates is so much of the infrastructure of the state is impervious to the leader that is democratically elected. It's a continuity government effectively, and all those are right-wing, deep forces that don't want change. So when you're sitting on top of that, it's very, very hard to operate, which is probably why they only recently stopped the intelligence sharing. And even that, like, I can imagine that will cause a massive ruckus within the state, because there's a whole swathe of the state that the democratically elected leaders are not meant to touch. So, and that's probably why JFK was killed as well. But like, it operates in every polity. You know, there's a deep structure to the state that does not want democratically leaders to mess with it. But he survived. But yeah, he probably will be next. That's what I'm saying. I don't think it's gonna. If they're doing a war on drugs, or they'll probably come up with a more new name for it. Operation Southern Spear might be the start of it. But what it is a pivot to getting rid of all the governments that aren't doing what they're told in Latin America, their backyard. And this goes back to the Monroe Doctrine in the 19th century, and it's never been different. You know, they dominate and want to exploit and treat the Latin America and the Caribbean as if it's basically a doormat that they can do whatever they want. And even, like, as I mentioned, Cuba's like the main obsession of these people, and they might be on next up. You know, I mean, even the fact that the United States owns Guantanamo Bay, that's like, they have no right to that. That's because it was previously a colony before the Castro Revolution, and they have as much right to that as Saddam Hussein had to Kuwait, or, like, you know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. And they have ratcheted up tensions with Cuba. So yeah, I mean, in that context, of course, I'm pro Petro. I think that I don't agree with everything he says. I don't agree, but he's also, the interesting thing is, it's become very clarified during the Gaza genocide, in that all the leaders in the world that have spoken out most forcefully are the ones that are outside the orbit of the United States, which is obviously not Israel. But it's interesting that it's all the whole alignment is about where do you stand in relation to the US empire. And he has basically been the leader in terms of presidents or prime ministers in speaking out in very robust terms against the genocide in Gaza. Previously, Evo did that in Bolivia as well. And he's actually done material things like stopped coal exports and other things, which, yeah, I think that's very impressive. I don't really think that we have we should be looking for perfection, or perfection even exists when you have such a rampant empire on your doorstep that is working around the clock. And of course, they're working around the clock to get rid of Petro. You know, there was about a year ago there, he made a speech where he said that there's an impending coup coming in, which I believed. I mean, I think that that's definitely a possibility, especially in Colombia. I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet, but we got to be on guard. As I mentioned, though, at the opening, I don't think they're very good at what they do, and I don't think they're ready for what they will. Like, Pete Hegseth is literally just stupid. Like, he's a former Fox News host. He's a meathead. He is a meathead. So if he's your strategy guy, he's heading the Pentagon. Trump obviously is not has barely any knowledge of geopolitics.
But he's not the brains behind the operation, is he? He's more like the face. I mean, he's a well-known.
But they are essentially, they are the people who are leading it visually. Like, they're the faces. Like, they're not smart imperialists. Like, even like going into the US, if they thought it was smart to go into Venezuela, they would have done it before, but they haven't, because it's not going to be a cakewalk. Like in Panama, when they invaded in December in 1989, it was over by January, and I think they got a couple of hundred Americans died, but about 800 Panamanians. They got the guy and they got out, and it was fine. They got their client leader in. There's absolutely no way that's how Venezuela will turn out. It's like you mentioned Vietnam.
Sorry to interrupt you. Get back to your point, but because we have a follow-up question, but I just wanted to plug my new episode on Global Majority for Peace. I interviewed the founder of Orinoco Tribune, And he talked about how Eric Prince demands something like $100 million bounty when dealing with like mercenary assassinations, which is why the Venezuelan bounty on Maduro, the US bounty on Maduro went from, I think, 10 or 15 million to 50 million earlier this year, but they're trying to get it to 100 million. So I guess, like, to your point of whether or not there are operations covertly happening around the world, basically to get rid of head of states that stand up against the US. They definitely are, but they need to reach the level of like 100 million or whatever amount that these mercenary outfits deem, worth it.
Yeah, well, they might assassinate him. There's a law there's a law in the US that you can't do that because there was the Church Committee in 1975, which was like the most extensive congressional investigation of the CIA in history since it was created, and it revealed all these plots to kill leaders and blah 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 blah, and they put in a directive that you can't assassinate foreign leaders, but Trump does. There's no way he's going to abide by that. I mean, the more likely thing is they'd kidnap him, but
did Trump ever abided by that?
What?
Genuinely?
Well, I don't. I mean, who knows? You don't know because it's all covert, but
yeah,
there was definitely before the Church Committee. Sorry.
It's for a good reason that Trump evokes the Aliens Act, because the Aliens Act give you prerogatives that you don't have anything else. It has been even criticized by the military in the US, how he is exploding in extraterritorial waters ships from third-party countries. This violates international law, this violates maritime law. But I think, Ileana, and you touch upon another recipe, another element to eliminate a leader is to call him a dictator. At times, the US financed the dictator to a truly dictator and feels in the right to then remove them when they are no longer useful. And others, resistance leaders, they are not all the same. We have all Latin American resistance leaders, anti-imperialist leaders. They are often stigmatized as dictators because they are not succumbing to the USA. I want to share a video on Maduro's response on US trying to stigmatize him as a dictator. Let's see what he has to say to Washington.
¿Cómo voy a ser un dictador? Si no me formé en la Escuela de las Américas, ni en Harvard. Yo no me formé en Langley, West Point, Escuela de las Américas, ni Harvard. Yo me formé en los liceos de Caracas, en los barrios del Valle, 23 de enero, Katia, Propatria, el cementerio. ¿Cómo voy a ser un dictador?
Good point.
Yeah. Well, I think we have a lot to talk. Shall we move to our next very heated topic? Ileana,
yeah. Can we just say
the BBC into your lap, and I'll keep Epstein on mine, the pedophile ring interfering in the human trafficking and pedo land, interfering in the foreign policy of the entire world. We're going to get into Epstein. Is not only about human trafficking, which is enough, but this is about interference. Now we have the proof, interference on world foreign high-level elite politics. But first of all, let's talk about another problem that people think, well, BBC. If you say about BBC, the beautiful David Attenborough documentary with these beautiful animals, extravagant footage, and we think BBC as a press authority. Unless you are in Britain, then if you are in Britain, you think differently about BBC. Ileana, it's on you. Matt.
Well, okay. So basically, as we know, there were some shocking resignations announced on Sunday, where the BBC Director General Tim Davie and the head of news Deborah Turness announced their resignations there. And in a post on Truth Social, Trump said, the top exclamation, capitalized top people in the BBC, including Tim Davie, the boss, are all quitting, fired because they were caught doctoring my very good, in brackets, perfect speech of January 6th. Thank you to the Telegraph for exposing these corrupt journalists. Okay, so I know, Sarah, you actually have a video of that doctored speech. And it is doctored, to be fair. Here we have it.
Yeah, we can have it. This is a comparison between the BBC panorama edit and the original clip. So we're going to see, wow, yeah, in fact, you could say BBC has manipulated Trump's speech. By all means, that doesn't mean Trump wasn't involved in authoritarian apology, but yeah, I think we could say let's check it out for ourselves.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on.
Okay, so basically, here's a situation where, and I think you alluded to this prior, Matt, where you were talking a little bit, we were talking about the intelligence sharing thing and how it's really the deep state that's there. But there are factions right now, because Trump is so overtly buffoonish and overtly imperialist, that there are different power factions within empire right now that are battling it out. Hence, perhaps why the UK is no longer, well, supposedly not going to share a very limited amount of intelligence regarding the drug books with the US. And this seems to be another thing here with the BBC, because I know you've done reporting on the BBC and how it hasn't been anyway, any sort of neutral, objective journalist outfit for a really long time now. It's been infiltrated by state interests and intelligence interests. So could you please give us the context and what you think?
Yeah, well, the top line is that, I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago or something, there was an article on the BBC where I think they were preempting it coming out in other media, but basically they gave access to their archives to a journalist. And he found that up till the 90s, the MI5, so the Domestic Security Intelligence Agency, security agency in the UK, had to vet and okay every single journalist hired by the BBC. And that was apparently ended in the 90s, but we don't know if it was. But the point, the ironic thing which makes me laugh is that it was much better when MI5 were vetting all the journalists. It wasn't always as bad as it is now. It's never, as you mentioned, it's always been a propaganda organ. But actually, if you look at articles, even before, it kind of changed after, during the War on Terror years, and effectively was taken down as a critical outlet because it did publish some stories. Like, I don't know if you remember that Andrew Gilligan scandal with David Kelly. This was the scandal where David Kelly leaked to the BBC about he eventually committed suicide. Do you remember that case? He leaked stuff about the claims that were being made about Saddam's weapons. Anyway, this was it was way back in 2003. Huh?
Okay. It wasn't to do with the white helmets, right? That's something totally different.
No. It was before that. But anyway, yeah. So the intelligence saying MI5 have from the beginning been involved in it, and it's always been it's kind of the most beautiful propaganda asset that any government in the world has, because it has this reputation for impartiality, and it has a brand that is. No one even comes close. The whole world knows the BBC. The whole world trusts the BBC. So it's great. Unfortunately, I think it's been ruined because it's got too close to the state. I mean, in some ways, the previous era that I'm talking about, where it was always a propaganda thing, where it had good journalism, that's a much better way of running a propaganda organization. Not make it so obvious, actually have some critical articles every now and then, because otherwise it becomes so obvious. And now if you watch it, it's just like watching CNN. I think CNN and BBC are the two most brain dead networks in the world. Like, I used to live in the States and I could watch Fox News, even though it's obviously more right wing, but you could hear ideas that were outside the blob even on the right or so. Whereas if I watched CNN, I literally felt like my brain was dying. It's weird.
Yeah.
Not because I agreed with Fox News, but it was just like CNN and BBC are like the congealed deep state take on everything. Anyway, so there's, but as you say now, all this stuff is coming out for different reasons. I don't know why that cut was made, that edit was made a long time ago. I don't know, that documentary was made years ago. Why is it coming out now? Who wants to take down the BBC? The other thing is like that. The interesting thing about the BBC is it should be, if it was done well, and like it was, I think, like maybe some people within it would designed it. It could be the most important institution for truth, for producing truthful journalism, because it doesn't have the corporate incentive, which is a major reason why the mainstream media is so bad, because they're businesses owned by businesses, and they make their money from advertising, which just structurally means that they can't ever publish truthful information, or very rarely. Whereas the BBC doesn't have that, so that the way that the BBC is controlled is more like political and what's called flak, where you just constantly hammer it. Like the right hammer it, the Israelis hammer it, even though it's just a propaganda organ for Israel. But if you keep them on their toes, and every single time you don't get exactly what you want, you just put fear into them, and that's created a situation where the whole institution is stacked full of personnel from the British establishment and the Tory party, and the right wing of the Labour Party, and its journalists are just stenographers, and just to go to another point, which is an individual like Rafi Berg, right? I don't know if you've heard of this guy, who is the BBC News online Middle East editor. So it's a very important role, has been since I think 2022 or 21. He was working for the CIA in Washington before 9/11, and there's the reason we know this is he gave an interview to a newspaper about his career, and he said, I was working in Washington for the news section of the State Department, and I was told halfway through that I pulled aside and said, just to let you know, you're actually working for the CIA. Your department, your section is part of the CIA. And his reaction to that in the interview, that the interviewer asked him what he felt, and he was like, I was absolutely thrilled. So there you have someone who's like one of the most senior BBC journalists saying he's absolutely thrilled about working for the CIA. And then later on, he wrote a book about one of Mossad's operations, and he got very close to Mossad, and actually gave an interview where he said, I'm tremendously proud of Mossad. And it gives me goosebumps when I think about their operations, or this operation that he covered. So, and he runs the online news section of the Middle East news section. So it's completely infiltrated. But this is what happens to every institution in our society. If there is an independent institution, it will get infiltrated and neutralized. That's how the power system works. It doesn't tolerate. And the BBC and the Guardian particularly are top priorities, because I remember someone told me once that they interviewed the Israeli ambassador in the early 2000s in London, and he said, the ambassador told this person, he said, we got two problems in the UK, BBC and Guardian. And that was and actually at that time, the Guardian also was pretty good on Palestine. BBC was not good, but it was not as bad as it is now. And the Israelis went to war and unleashed, I don't know what their covert operations were, but there was just huge amounts of flak, huge amounts of pressure put on the BBC and the Guardian to toe the line, and it's worked. But as I say, this is just like standard. Can you think of any mainstream mass media legacy institution which does critical analysis, or at least even conceptualizes of the British or the American state as an imperial state? It's impossible.
I mean, I think they can't be really, right? Because I mean, the propaganda, I keep saying that there are three pillars of US imperialism, and one of the most important ones is propaganda. The other two are military and financial, but propaganda is so important to uphold this far of an empire. So they're not going to let anything through that would bring actual truth. I recently had an interview with James can't say his last name, from RBN, Revolutionary Blackout Network. And he made a really good point, which was that it's the people in the global north that really do have the most power to stop their governments. In theory, if we believed it.
Yeah.
Right?
And we should not forget BBC, when it was first established in 1932, the name was BBC Empire Service. Empire Service. Can it be more telling? And then they renamed BBC Overseas Service during the war. So they are a service. And I think, well, me having worked on a British institution, I can say the institution, I think British institutions are very strong and tainted by the imperialist mindset. It's very different than working in a German institution. It's very different than working in a Brazilian institution. I've been working all of them. It's absolutely, it's alarmingly different. And what strikes me most is that they don't need to establish the rules. You know what you need to obey, because if you step a little bit out of the line, rules that you don't even know what they are, they will punish you.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that.
Really punish you. And so there is a level of compliance that to remain working on those institutions that you don't have anywhere else. I have experienced a lot of autonomy in German institution, a lot of autonomy in Brazilian institution. In British institutions, you have no autonomy. The work is divided like in a Fordism, that you know the minimum amount to do your job. That makes you agree with everything. That makes you, and you're not able to question much because this is a higher level information. So the segregation of information, the classification of information in imperialistic countries like the US, like the UK, they are completely normalized. The way they classify everything, they need to privilege on everything without any control. It's just a subjective decision, a discretionary decision of the British. But bear in mind, people who are working on the ground, they have basic no autonomy. I have been told many times that there is no classification such as illegal. You just say high risk. If you're measuring the legal risk and you try to say this is unconstitutional, they will make sure you remove this. And you say to the minister that what they're saying is just a high risk. High risk is a reputational risk because we need to serve a constitution. We need to serve the values that the people and the history of Britain have put together. So we have a Bible, and this Bible is called Constitutional Rights, Constitutional Principles, and this is what we should be obeying by. But no, inside the institution, you're going to obey the endless wishes of people on power, and you should comply. Obey, comply, not question, is extremely important if you want to survive in a British institution. No critical thinking, no autonomy, and otherwise you will be punished in wide shut style. Sorry.
You know, no, I hear what you're saying. Like, George Orwell wrote a foreword to Animal Farm, and George Orwell obviously worked in the propaganda section of the BBC during the Second World War. But he wrote effectively what you're saying. He said he was like analyzing how you get such a conformity of thought in a place where actually there's no disciplining method. You're not going to get put in prison for saying the wrong thing, blah 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 blah. And he said that the British establishment know, and his phrase was, what it wouldn't do to say. They knew what just instinctually and by a process of a culturalization. But that doesn't just work at the BBC. That works across I found the same thing in the Financial Times. You know, like I found when I worked there, not years ago now, but I kind of understood how this works when you're not working in like this. For Pravda in the Soviet Union, where you have to take the party line, or how do they control what you think? And it is just an internalized framework, an internalized mechanism for thought control, and it's much more effective than somewhere like a model like Pravda, because Pravda everyone knows that it's the party line, and the journalists know, they can't say X, Y, Z, and so it's much more obvious. Whereas our system, where we have this conformity of thought and very tight spectrum, works much better, because if you talk to any journalist in the mainstream media, they'll tell you I can write what I want and I can say what I want, and they really believe it. But obviously, if they start saying anything different, they'll be out of a job. But so it's a much more beautifully integrated and system of propaganda. But it is kind of being fractured by social media. I mean, like this new podcast, you know, like unapologetically anti-imperialist. You wouldn't have before the internet. There was no way to disseminate any of this stuff out. In fact, there was no way to disseminate much information outside of the legacy institutions at all. And that's why they hate social media, the establishment, and that's why they want to move towards censorship. And it's also why they've started this whole campaign against so-called disinformation and misinformation. If you look at, I don't know if you have seen these organizations that have sprouted up about combating misinformation and disinformation in the US, and it's all about Russia. Obviously, it's all about Russia and China as well. But if you start looking at who the funders of these organizations are, it's nearly always like the State Department, the Foreign Office, and it's basically the liberal they want to taint any information not got by people outside of the legacy institutions as disinformation. And
they call this not editorial line. This is our editorial. So generally, one type of control is to say this is outside of our editorial. So don't piss off our financing people who are financing us. And you know what? This is what the French philosopher Foucault called docile bodies. People who internalize norms and behave in predictable, controlled ways, because the institution are mechanisms for producing obedient subjects. I'm not against institutions. I just think when power and money shapes them, and we have no mechanism of control, that's what happens. But I think in Britain, this is far more tangible, everyday life, recurring and intense than anywhere else I have been. Not that I have been that many places, but I have been to significant places and working environments. And I have to say, this is in Britain that I understood Foucault when I went to the working market in Britain.
I think that it is. I think Britain is unique, and it's not just it's the imperial history, but it's also like the class structure. You know, I think they don't have it in the States in the same way. This goes back 1,000 years. You know, like when the Normans invaded, they divvied up the land, and many of the people that got land then, they're still barons now. They've still got that land. So we have a class structure. It's not like India where it's formalized, but it's informally similar. Like, and they all go to the same institutions like Harrow or Eton, and it gives you a sense of entitlement, all that kind of stuff. But it also, the proof's in the pudding. If you compare the US to the UK, like the Gaza stuff, there's been 0 whistleblowers in the UK. There's been from within the government. There's been quite a few in the US. People have quit. Even about the Venezuela stuff, I don't know if you saw that Trump had to remove the senior military official who was running Venezuela policy. But the deference to authority, which is ingrained in the British establishment, is much deeper, and it goes back hundreds of years. And it's a real impediment to anything good. And it also goes to the royal family. You know, if you look at the institutions of British society, they're all about revering and deference to authority. They're all about it. If you go to a court, I mean, we've all been to the court, right, with the Julian Assange case. Like, you're meant to be like, oh my God, I'm not worthy, because they all wear silly costumes. Yeah. They have these silly wigs. You look at all the architecture; it's all about this like you're not worthy mentality, and it's deep. And I actually don't think they have it in the same way in the United States at all, and that's why I actually like. But I think, like you say, it's to do with the imperial history, but it is also about the class structure, which predates the empire and also outlasted the empire as well.
I'm going to excuse myself for 1 minute, Ileana. I'll be back with you guys.
But also just and also just for audience to know that it's called the Royal Courts of Justice. So you can imagine that tough circumstance there. Yeah. I mean, but also there's the other thing that the UK is very small. I think we kind of forget that because we're so self-important, but the population is actually what, 60, 70 million. So in terms of the world stage now that it's no longer supposedly the British Empire, though I am just going to reiterate that it is part of the US Empire. It's not that significant alone as a country. It's only significant in terms of its power in the US Empire. There is some comments here that I just want to address. One of them is Makaru saying, I've experienced the same party line culture in NGOs they are funded by the same people. There's a fact checkers. And yes, certainly, I think I include NGOs as part of the pillar of propaganda because, of course, there are some that might sort of fall outside of the traditional NGO thing, but NGOs sort of in an imperialist sense are used across the world to basically further imperial agendas in the global south. So that's why they're funded by the same people. And often, they are part of the color revolution apparatus. I can never say that word. Apparatus. Yeah, of that propaganda pillar. So thank you for that comment. But yeah, that's no surprising note. That was very quick, Sarah. Welcome back. I was actually going to use the time that you're away to ask Matt the second question, which is about, if we can put it up, your collaboration with Double Down News, Matt, where I'm going to try to do this. Where you are putting together a charge sheet that will see Starmer, Sunak, Lamy, Cameron, Healy, and Shapps indicted by the ICC for ordering British participation in the Gaza genocide. So I want to ask you about this because, certainly I have a slight differencing of opinion in the way that it is framed, that I'd love to hear your pushback on this, that the UK is somehow outside of the imperialist agendas. Like, these figures are outliers in terms of the UK. And I understand the rhetoric device of that. Like, we have a moral center that we have to adhere to, and that can sort of keep the bad apples accountable. But I just feel that that's very hard for us to stomach when the UK is so clearly an active participant in the US Empire, and before that as the British Empire. So I find that hard to stomach. But before we get on to the second part of this question, just can you break down the significance and strategy on using the ICC to hold them accountable? And basically, convince me and tell me what this campaign is about. Because obviously, I think I will support the concept behind it, but just the framing, I'm curious about. So go ahead.
Yeah,
Matt.
to be honest with you, the tweet's not a comment on the ICC in a sense of what it is as an institution, whether it's a tool of the empire, which I think it is or has been up till now, and will likely continue to be. And I don't think it will ever happen, what I'm saying. But the point is, we have to use the concepts which were presented by the establishment and flip them on them. So the idea, literally, I've been saying this for months, or maybe a year, or more than a year, that the ICC should prosecute UK ministers, and even people it shocks people, the idea, because it's so deeply ingrained in our psyche that only official enemies, African dictators, Putin, can actually be war criminals. When in fact, of course, our violence is way, way higher than any of those individuals. So it's more it's more about saying, well, look, if we're going to have if you project this image and you project these principles, or you profess to project these principles, then okay, apply them to yourselves. And if you did apply them, if the ICC was what it says on the tin, which is a international institution to bring war criminals to justice around the world without fear or favor, then of course that you should prosecute UK ministers. And then obviously the maybe the more important point is that the Prime Minister of Israel and his former defense minister are both indicted by the ICC. So that does give us a weapon, effectively, to go after people who are their accomplices. Because if they have already been found to be well, not guilty, but there's enough for a arrest warrant, then surely you can do anyone who's an accomplice or a participant, an ally in the campaign should be also indicted. That's just legal process. So I think that it's useful to use that, because otherwise you just say, well, what would I say? You have to have a goal, and even if you don't think the goal is achievable because of the institutional shortcomings, you can still change the idea, or change the overturn window. Because the ICC was opened in 2002. It was the Rome Statute was signed in 1998, and the next year after it opened, George Bush and Tony Blair invaded Iraq in a totally illegal war. And that was even called illegal at the time by Kofi Annan, who was Secretary General of the UN. And they've never even contemplated opening a case against Bush and Blair. So it was obvious from the start that it wasn't actually going to do what it said it was going to do. But again, you can use these. The norms that are used to project soft power can be used against them. Because if you we did that with the Assange campaign, if you constantly use the free press as a way to project power around the world and hammer official enemies, then we have a tool to then say, well, look, this is, if you constantly say you support freedom, why have you got a journalist in prison? And it goes to war, to human rights, everything. So I think we can use that. I don't think it will happen, obviously. Well, not obviously, but I don't think it will happen. But we should push for it. And I think that the Netanyahu and Gallant arrest warrants were a watershed, because they're obviously, it's not in the West geographically, Israel, but it's a Western colony. You know, it's not completely intertwined with the Western system. So the fact that happened was huge, and they knew how important it was, because they launched a massive campaign against Karim Khan, who was the chief prosecutor. They've had to take the mask off, because Netanyahu went to Hungary, which is a signatory to the ICC, after the arrest warrant agreement. They didn't arrest him. So it just shows that the system operates very nicely in theory, and when it's against official enemies, everything works as it should. As soon as something stops working as it should, like a Western leader gets indicted, they just throw it all out. They allowed Netanyahu's plane with him on it to fly in French airspace and Spanish airspace after the arrest warrant. They should have grounded those planes. So the whole system is all smoke and mirrors. The international law is the same thing. It doesn't exist. It exists as long as it's applied. But if it's only applied to official enemies, then it doesn't exist.
We haven't seen China respecting international law. We have been this global South respecting international law. I mean,
but they didn't design it. That's the point. It was designed in Washington and London, and so in some ways, and what they say, the global South, is fair enough. It's like, well, you use this to discipline us and make sure. Look at even what they're doing with Maduro. He's now a narco trafficker designated, and the war on drugs. Who are the US? They don't have no right to lecture Latin America about the drugs.
Yeah, they have a fentanyl.
Where's the market for the drugs? It's all in the United States. And why is that? It's because the imperial elite have basically eviscerated their own society so they can store the money for themselves. So it's the whole thing's upside down. What right does the US have to drop chemicals all over the countryside in Colombia? No right at all. So it's just a way to lecture. And again, with Gaza, it reveals so much of this to people who aren't aware of it. With the ICC, when the arrest warrants went out, Senator I think it was Lindsey Graham, made a speech where he said, "Oh my God, the ICC was created to go after us." He literally said what we all know. He literally said it wasn't created to go after Western leaders. It's amazing,
But Matt, you said something very important. You said here in Britain, the levels of violence that we have perpetrated. I don't know if you mentioned it Britain or West with it is much higher. Can you give an example why these people that you say they should be part of the ICC, they should be join the club?
So
our Global South audience, what Britain has done to deserve the ICC prize?
Yeah, so I think like 2003, that was an illegal invasion. As I say, it was based on cooked intelligence, blah blah blah. But that tweet that this whole thing started with referenced the genocide in Gaza, which I think just anyone from the outside can see that is like there's less confusion or ambiguity about what's happened there than there's ever been about anything. Like it was so clearly a genocide. It was so clear there were just war crimes going on and on and on, which is why it's quite interesting that Israelis pushed the international legal system so hard that they had to issue the arrest warrants. I'm guarantee they really didn't want to do that because of but they literally were like, we can't survive as an institution if the whole world is watching what the Israelis are doing. They got Yoav Gallant going on TV and saying we're withdrawing all water, food and electricity from 2.3 million people, half of whom are children, which is a contravention of the Geneva Convention. It's collective punishment. You know, all these leaders are taught just do that stuff, but don't say it. But the Israelis just said it all and flaunted it. So they pushed it hard enough. But anyway, so they got indicted. And then the UK side, like this is why I think that there needs to be a reformulation of what UK's role was, which is that it's often called complicity, even by people on the left. And complicity can be a crime, but it's not a serious crime as participation. So complicity, in a sense, in a definitional sense, would be something like if you sell weapons to Israel while they're committing these crimes, you're complicit. But it's like a passive thing. Whereas if you're and this is why I think they're participants and it's more serious, is if you're collecting intelligence over that territory and handing that intelligence to Israel while they're committing the crimes, then you are a participant. And that's just the legal definition. And in fact, you mentioned Venezuela,
if you put your soldiers there, as you have reported many times, if you train your soldiers with Israel, you make collaborations, I don't think you can get away saying you're just helping out.
No, but again, that's an interesting, like the training of Israeli soldiers, again, it's complicity, but I don't think that's participation. You're not unless you're directing. Like if your participation for me is like the actual operation on the ground, you are part of it, either through intelligence, your sold personnel or something. And the UK is both. Like we're complicit and you can actually take people to court for complicity, like selling weapons or training soldiers that are involved in war crimes. But so they should be indicted on both. But participation is obviously more serious. And in these spy flights that I've been covering, well, they've stopped now, but they started in December 2023. They were over Gaza for 5 hours, and it came out subsequently where the intelligence was going directly to the Israeli military in real time. That only came out recently. Like before that, the UK government just said we are providing it to relevant authorities, but they did that because they know that's participation. But so. If they're handing this intelligence to them, they're using it, and there's no way they can control it, then they're participants. So the people that ordered that.
And there is a very good thing to use anti-terrorist legislation in Britain to detain people, to detain journalists that expressed their support for the Palestinian sovereignty. So these people have been arrested. We have here George Galloway, we have Craig Murray, we have Asa Winston-Lee, we have Haim Rashid, we have Sarah Wilkerson. They have been arrested under national security and terrorist legislation. And let me tell you, why do you do that? Because they want your sources. They know you haven't done anything wrong. They know you're not part of any terror organization, but they want to know who are your sources in Palestine, who are your sources, which is constitutionally protected. Journalists doesn't need to reveal their sources. So they make this subjective because the anti-terror legislation in Britain, just the police office can form a subjective convincement that and go after you. They don't need any objective suspicion. it's all in their head. Voices in my head tells me that you might be a terrorist because you mentioned the word Palestine, and with dignity. So if you apply dignity to Palestine, and if you apply dignity to Palestinians, I can chase you as a terrorist, arrest you in Heathrow, in Gatwick, whatever, and I want everything from you, because if you don't give me your computer, everything, it's 5 years in jail automatically, because they want our sources, because they want to know who are the people in Palestine. They want to target them. Sorry to interrupt you, but
No,
I think
yeah. Well, I think that's part of it, but I think maybe more important is just like instilling fear in people as well, because they lost control of the narrative quite well. There's two things: there's instilling fear, and there's also just working at the behest of the Israel lobby. I think that's a major. Like the Israel lobby just wants to. Zionism is a cross-border project. Like it doesn't, and it only exists really because of it. It was always a lobbying operation. If you look at how the Zionist movement got the Balfour Declaration, they basically lobbied the British government relentlessly, Chaim Weizmann and other people, and effectively wrote the Balfour Declaration for the British government. Now, they knew from the start that the only way they'd get the Balfour Declaration, they'd get Israel established and then maintain it, was that they would have to lobby relentlessly the imperial powers that could keep them going, because it's a small country. 9 million people is smaller than Wales geographically. So the whole Zionism has always been imbued with lobbying. And the other point about it is not many people talk about it.
Or it's more than that. I think it's intimidation.
Infiltration.
Infiltration, meddling in national politics. Because if I'm paying British parliamentarians, Brazilian parliamentarians, trips, if I'm paying them to talk about, not to talk about, because we had a scoop here in Brazil that we had someone telling us, one of the members of parliament came up to me and said how the Israeli lobby was oppressing, intimidating them, and threatening them with lawsuits if they would talk about Palestine, if you would not remove the support for Palestine. And another 4 MPs came to me. So we released this scoop. So even in Brazil, which is not really much of an interest, it's not involved in this in any shape, well, not involved directly. So they are, it's intimidation. Also with money, blackmailing. I don't think this can call this a lobby. Do you think so, Matt?
I think it is a lobby, yeah. I mean, it works in different ways. Like the tactics are different parts of it. So you've got like straight political lobbying, like Conservative and Labour Friends of Israel. You've got smearing, which is done often by groups like Anti-Defamation League or the Board of British Deputies in the UK. Like, and then you've got funding, like APAC, funding political campaigns. There's many different parts of it. But altogether, that's what I call the lobby, just the various different elements. And the interesting thing is, like, part of it's got Israel in the title, but a lot of it doesn't. A lot of them call themselves Jewish organizations and present themselves as representing communal Jewish interests. But actually, they've been infiltrated and captured by the Israel. And there's many of those institutions in the UK, like Board of Deputies, which I mentioned, but also Jewish Labour Movement. And they effectively operate as Israel lobby groups, but actually it's a clever way of doing it because it's much harder to criticize them, because it's seen as criticizing Jewish people rather than Israel, which it is. The other point is the anti-Semitism thing. Like, if you look, I literally don't know of a single organization which claims to be fighting anti-Semitism, which is not in fact underneath all the propaganda an Israel lobby group. That's a huge problem, and obviously makes anti-Semitism much worse. But so there's many parts of it, and I think part of the reason that it's taken off so much is partly because it was always integral to the Zionist movement, just for reasons of unique to the Zionist movement, in that it was I can't think of another occasion where they've got an imperial power to just impose another country on top of another country, but also the fact that it's quite small and has always needed a patron, which has been the United States, mainly from the 60s onwards. But that's one part of it. But also the other part is that people are scared to talk about it, or have been up till the Gaza genocide. I used to talk about the Israel lobby and I'd get called a crank or anti-Semite, or like there's a very prominent journalist called Owen Jones, who's kind of like very mainstream, but writes for The Guardian. He's been good on Gaza. But I remember he literally, before Gaza, he'd only ever talk about the Israel lobby in inverted commas, which is mad because it's so obvious, and it was there way before. And there was a whole book written by John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt in 2007 called The Israel Lobby, about how, and they're not lefties, they're people they're realists, but they're like, it's not conducive to American state interests now, and our foreign policy is so skewed by this lobby that we're doing things that are not in our own interest, our own self-interest. And I think that's the case in the United States, and it's the case here. I didn't used to think that. I used to be more like, well, Israel does our dirty work in the Middle East, blah blah blah. But I'm much further on to, especially with the work I did at Declassified. When you start looking into,
let's unpack that, because I'm still, even with everything that you're saying, both of you, I still do think that Israel is very much part of the U.S. empire, the Western imperialism before that, from its origin. But again, we're talking about power struggles within the empire. And I would also say that the thing about Zionism, which is perhaps unique in a sense, but it's not unique in terms of mechanism or in terms of intention or in terms of utility, but in terms of effectiveness. It is the most effective propaganda mask, ethical propaganda mask for imperialism that we've had like in the last 100 years. And so because it had this moral army, the moral justification of saving the Jews, that's been so effective that they are allowed to act with complete impunity. So now what we're faced is, and I think often what is misunderstood, not by you guys, but in general, when we talk about these different factions within empire, is like, for example, just the deep state or NGOs or whatever. These are groups of people. They have jobs within that. They have infrastructure within the imperial appendages. So when they have their own self-interest in terms of how do they get more power. They're greedy. They're also, some of them, quite psychotic. How do they get more power? And that's what we're looking at, like these different factions within imperialism that are fighting it out for prominence or for more, for more relevance, especially as the Zionist mask is failing. But I don't think any of the mechanisms that you're talking about, lobbying or intimidation or coercion, aren't things that already exist in empire. They do. And I would like to say too, like, this is my new catchphrase, but genocide is a feature of imperialism, not a bug. And this is just the most prominent genocide that we have. But certainly there have been many, many genocides in the past 100 years that have been completely ignored and haven't been labeled genocides. And they will continue to happen. So I think that's really important to factor in, because I know a lot of people who are like, well, Israel is controlling the US, or Israel isn't controlling the UK. And something you just said, Matt, about how Israel is no longer working in the interest of the US. And I just kind of not so much push back, but just sort of point out that US interests in terms of imperialism is so incredibly destructive and genocidal across the world. Are they just saying that they are finally, because the mask of Zionism is falling, that is no longer useful for imperialism's purpose, which I'm kind of seeing now in the mainstream, as they sort of seem to be throwing Israel under the bus, trying to separate themselves. So I'm wondering, is that what Mearsheimer is talking about, or is it something else?
I mean, I don't disagree with you. Like, I think maybe it's changed over the decades, and maybe the lobby wasn't in control. But look, just look at what is happening in the US, particularly. Like Thomas Massie went on Tucker Carlson and said every single congressperson and senator has a AIPAC minder that walks around with them. Miriam Adelson, who's a Zionist fanatic, gave $100 million to Trump, and Trump said, in my first term, you and your husband Sheldon Adelson were in the White House more than anyone else, and they told him to move the embassy to Jerusalem in his first time. Like, it's just clear. And then in the UK side, there was
it's not separate, right? I think the issue that I'm having is
because if you have there's not that. Well, and then
like
another example,
like the war machine.
You can say stuff about our own government, right? You can criticize US foreign policy, UK foreign policy in this country, that stuff you can't say about Israel now. There's not people getting arrested. Their house was raided for criticizing British.
But I don't know if that's...
So what imperial function does it serve that our state is... that's not imperial. That's domestic.
Well, I think there are contradictions because our empire is crumbling, and so as these outsized power struggles are happening, they're just fighting it out for prominence. But also because Zionism has been so effective as a propaganda mosque, it's been.
But I think I'm not saying that it's not effective. That there's any like moral qualm with what Israel are doing, and that's why they're only doing it because of the thing. It's more just like they are the tail is wagging the dog, and that's because it's like you say, it's not rocket science. It's infrastructure. If you create a massive infrastructure, which is what they've done with AIPAC and Conservative Friends of Israel, Labour Friends of Israel, that means that politicians can't move. And Alan Duncan, who was the former foreign minister under Theresa May from 2016 to 19, he wrote a memoir where he said, he was a foreign minister, remember, and he said to the permanent undersecretary of the Foreign Office, the Israelis think they control the Foreign Office, and they do. And there was an Israeli spy or embassy official called Shai Massot who was recorded saying, we're going to take down Alan Duncan, and we're going to take down, and this is in a documentary by Al Jazeera called The Lobby. Like I think part of the reason people don't want to accept what's in front of their nose, and this fact is number one, they think it lets the empire off, which it doesn't, because we're not then ascribing morality to the empire. But it also, people don't want to feed into anti-Semitic tropes, which is okay, fair enough. It should be a concern. You don't want to, but if the facts are the facts. And if China was writing that,
I just don't think the conclusion is what you're saying. I think the conclusion is that it is part of the empire. I just don't see how it's separate. It's just another faction gaining prominence in the empire.
But it has its own interests. Yeah, it is.
But if we took it away, but it has no interest outside of imperialism, though, does it?
Well, no, I think that it's imperial.
We took it away completely.
It's not
what
fighting.
Would happen? We would still have imperialism.
Of course we would, yeah. But we're not talking about its role within the empire. We're talking about what it has done to the polities in the West, like the patrons. It has captured the state. It's like, look, the state is a carcass that's getting eaten on by various different forces, corporations. Like the state has been captured by BAE Systems in the UK. That's an arms company. But why is it different for foreign states? Why is it conceptually unthinkable that a country could, with a massive lobbying operation, could capture the government in a way a corporation can capture the government? It's the same thing. Goldman Sachs give money to a politician, then they work for them.
I guess that's my point, is that it's not separate. Like I find the idea that it's separate the bizarre part, because I think it's completely
not separate,
part of
but it is. But it has its own interests, which are not always going to align with the US and UK interests. And the point is, like
I think that the issue is that I don't think that US or UK interests are that coherent, because like you said, there's so many different factors. There's so much incompetence within the supposed imperial agendas, and we do see different factions coming in and out, having, so we'll have things like Ukraine, what's happening in Ukraine, like we'll have Zelensky having his own self-interest, we'll have different puppets having that. Like actually last week we covered the Rio State massacre. We have like Brazilian US puppets coming in with their own self-interest, trying to use and lobby the US.
It's probably what you have here is a convergence of interest to discredit the state, because they are self-interest. States by definition should be interest of a population, hopefully common good. And I think with Israel is a little bit about Frankenstein. You create a monster, and at some point he will have autonomous action, and he'll come to hunt you. He'll come to apply to you the same things that you created him to do. UK, Israel.
I guess the only thing I disagree with what you're saying, Sara, is that we have an interest in our people. I'm not seeing the interest in our people from our governments or from the US empire.
We should.
They don't. But they're not. The state doesn't. That's not a priority for them.
Yeah,
That's not
you
fair.
have states today hijacked by corporations, and I think the conversion, people in power are very necessary for people in private companies. It's an
It's part of
enterprise to
imperialism.
make. Yeah, it's an enterprise to use state prerogatives, the state funds to enrich individuals. I think in the end we are seeing a dismantlement of the state, and we are having individuals, the dictatorship of individualism using the state. That's the paradox, because they claim to be self-made, but they are parasiting on the state constantly. This is in Brazil. Here in Brazil, we have an ultra-right, which is a strategic conversion between people who want power, want money, and people who want to infiltrate the state. The organized crime does infiltrate the state through members of parliament here in Brazil, through other people. And I think when we are talking about Israel and the United States, I don't think it's clear for us what the complex game, who is it's like an abusive relationship where they change roles. Now I am in control, now you are in control. And it's very interesting because I think when you create a child to be a bully, don't expect this child to bully you at some point.
But the point is, like, Israel was never like that. The Zionists, they don't see, they're not an ally. In 1946, no. they bombed and blew up the King David Hotel and killed 80 people, like the biggest terrorist attack. They then went to, there was a massive terrorist campaign against the British. They do actions against the British. So this is what I'm saying. Like, yes, they're part of an empire, but
so does the US. So does the US against the Nord Stream pipeline. You know, I mean.
But okay, so my question to you then: why do they even need a lobby then? Why do they need a lobby if
all these factions need lobbies because they're human beings involved? Like Big Pharma has lobbies. You know, BlackRock will have lobbies.
Exactly.
All sorts of different factions will have.
But
lobbies.
You're saying that it's impossible to, but the US government doesn't lobby itself. So, but my point is, why does you're saying there's no way that it can be contrary to the interests of Western empire because it is the Western empire. Why does it need a lobby then?
No, I'm saying that the Western empire's interest, apart from just imperialism in general, has contradictions within it, right? The imperialism in general it's not really a coherent policy. It's more just like more expansion, more money, more power, more coercion. How do we sustain our hegemony? And within that, there are so many hundreds and thousands of different factions within that trying to assert different self-interested power plays.
Which is good news for us. Because if it's not coherent, if they are fighting against each other, well, as we've seen the fractures on MAGA right now, where MAGA against MIGA, make Israel great again, should not be part of the agenda.
I'm talking about countries like Ukraine. Ukraine never had.
It's amazing that they are having this.
Ukraine's not funding politicians, right? They're not funding people. But yeah, as soon as it became in the Western interest that they got invaded, they backed them with billions in weapons because that's in the empire's interest. Why then does Israel need this massive lobbying? If that's why wouldn't it just be like Ukraine, where you don't need a lobby? You just
Well, I think first of all, Ukraine is much younger in terms of this whole thing. Like right now we're looking at them getting like massive amounts of funds, right? And some would argue it started in 2014 or prior to that, but we're looking at a completely different. You're right in that there is a similar propaganda push about Ukraine, you know, the same moral stance of Ukrainians. They're using that as a propaganda tool, but in essence, it's not the same project as Zionism, which is far more, evocative and
that's probably a mix of both, man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really disagreeing with you.
I just see evidence that, of course, Israel is part of the empire and it does the dirty work of the US and UK and the Middle East, blah blah blah. But
it has its own self-interest, though.
But I also feel like it's captured the state and in the US and the UK through lobbying, which means that the state doesn't always take actions which it would take otherwise. Like, For example, the domestic repression that we're seeing, we don't see it on any other issue. And I believe that's because of the lobbying. And we don't see any other issue, politicians becoming ruined. Like Jeremy Corbyn, for example, all these institutions, Israel lobby groups, basically got together to destroy him. And he said to me, I interviewed him maybe a year ago or so, and I was asking him, and he said, when I was Labour leader, I was taken aside by the Parliamentary Labour Party Committee group or some group within Parliament, and made to promise. They said, will you promise that you will automatically undertake and to support any action taken by the Israeli military? They said this to him privately.
Oh
and he
my
said, no.
God!
But is there any other country in the political system that they he wasn't asked about the US. He wasn't asked about Saudi Arabia.
Country, right? Because it's not. That's why it's different from any other country, because it's not. It's not really an independent country. We're not. It is in the very inner core of empire.
But it could be an independent country without the lobby. That's what I'm saying.
I guess we could. Yeah, but it's not really right now. Say it is, but it's not really. Well, I guess people are asking why is this conversation even. Like, why am I insisting on this? And I think I'm insisting on it because I know you said that this doesn't let empire off the hook, but I think it does, because like I said, genocide is a feature of imperialism. So if we just assume that it's only Zionism that are doing all these things, I think it's just a trajectory thing. The power is expanding with this Zionist project because it's been so successful as a propaganda tool for empire. But essentially, like any appendage of empire given this type of power and expansion would act this way. Like all the factions of empire kind of do this with different degrees of success, and Israel is like the most successful
project of their own. I think as much as they are part of the empire, they are born out of the empire, they are project of the empire, they are colonial Jewish supremacist state. That's what they are, founded by Britain and I'd say more, Israel is an anti-Semitic project, because when they started it, they wanted to the Jewish question, where are we going to put the Jews? We don't want the Jews in Europe. Let's find a place where we can put all of them. So Israel is an anti-Semitic project in the end of the day. But I think as much as they are in the genesis, and you can't deny it's in the DNA of this project, they have their own interests. They want to expand through Lebanon. They want to expand the greater Israel. They are selling intelligence technology the worldwide. They become a thing of their own as well. I think it's part of the family, but they are an independent member of this family who is absolutely crazy, mental, anachronic, genocidal, full of hatred. What we've seen coming from Israel and the Israeli public applauding it. That's what is the most crazy thing. Because when those things happen, I mean, Vietnam was a divider in the US. Iraq was a divider in the UK. Palestine is. The whole world is protesting against Israel, protesting against the genocide, but the Israeli population seems to be applauding, according to the polls. Isn't this insane? This is a sheer insanity.
Look what this is actually completely expected in a country where people literally from the US go there and settle. There and displace people. I mean, what do you expect from a society like that? Also, the indoctrination there would be even worse than the indoctrination internationally, surely, right?
Yeah, I would argue they have a project of their own, and a project that is culturally instilled on the Holocaust industry. We are victims of the world, and I think there is something.
But we have a lot of overlaps in everything you've said. We have a lot of overlaps. But
and we have to talk about Epstein. We have to talk about many things, Ileana.
Yes, sorry. Like definitely Epstein connects this, but
yeah. Okay, okay, Matt, go ahead.
No, I was saying I think I'm done now, right? You're moving on to Epstein, or am I meant to talk about Epstein as well?
You meant to talk about everything. Let's get to the end of the show. People love to.
Well, I did want to say one thing before Epstein. but go ahead. Did you have anything else to say? I was going to say one thing about Epstein, but I suppose we kind of covered it with the ICC. So yeah, unless you have anything to say about the alliance of the Sahel states withdrawing from the ICC, citing it as an instrument of neocolonial repression.
Yeah, they're right. They should. I mean, I think like I think that all these institutions, the whole infrastructure that was built up after the Second World War with the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF, World Bank, WTO eventually, ICC later, ICJ, UN, they were all created and reflective of the power balance at the time. And the US left the Second World War like in a position of like unrivaled global power. It was like half the global output manufacturing was done in the US, and Europe was in ruins. So they created a world in that image to take advantage of it. And that carried on up to ICC and up till now. So why should a global South country want to be part of an architecture which was created to keep them poor and exploited? And that's not just economic institutions, that's also ICC and stuff. Like,
I also want to say that.
Go on.
Sorry, just want to say one point about your analysis for why you're doing the campaign against Lamy, Shield, and who else was in that?
Healy, Grant Shapps, Rishi Sunak, yeah.
Right. That using the ICC as a framework for holding these war criminals accountable, alleged war criminals, just in case of libel laws. China actually agrees with your strategy in terms of using the UN Charter, and is why Xi Jinping has mentioned, I think, the UN Charter and international law several times in several speeches just this year. He's talked about the Global Governance Initiative and how all countries multilaterally should be held under the same standards. So you're in good company.
Well, no, but you have to use that kind of stuff because a lot of it is good, right? If you look at the UN Charter, it outlaws aggressive wars. It's called the Supreme International Crime. So it outlaws what they're doing in Venezuela. It outlaws what happened in Gaza, the ICJ. All of them can be used because you have to understand about the propaganda. The basis of propaganda is American exceptionalism and Western exceptionalism. The idea that we apply principles that we all agree with, right? Which is like democracy, freedom, human rights, peace. So if they're going to claim that and stuff it down our necks from the moment we're born, we can at least try and apply that. Say, well, okay, well, you're applying that here. It's a way to show the hypocrisy of the whole system. So it's definitely a useful tactic. And also on the ICC thing, like I'm not hopeful it's going to happen, but the Netanyahu gallant showed that things happen that we can't. I've also looked at the evidence, and it's a slam dunk, that case, like in a way that's not really the case. Often the case, even with Iraq, like there'd have to be like a big trial of it was definitely a massive war crime, but you'd have to it would be intense, like breakdown of the different in litigation, whereas this is like you've already got two people indicted for the crimes, and we've already got evidence. We've got a picture of the spy plane over Gaza that was handling the intelligence on days when war crimes were being committed. Like there's no defense. So we have to push our imagination and normalize ideas that they don't want normalized. Like our own leaders can actually be war criminals. So I think strategic, because otherwise, what's the other option is to say, I don't believe in the ICC. What do you then call for these ministers? What do you call for? There's no other way to hold them accountable in the framework of our country. A citizen's arrest, private prosecution, but like none of them are going to have any teeth. So I think it's worth doing. Also, it should be the US as well. You know, like more Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Donald
Your
Trump.
internet completely frozen.
Is my internet gone?
Oh, you're back. You're back. Yeah, I agree with you. We have a framework for accountability. You've kind of convinced me. One thing, although I'm also convinced by the Alliance of Sahel states, you know, when they just one thing to say, to continue. I remember a report that you wrote about how they were trying to cover their tracks a little bit too late, I think, where they were funneling some of their, military weapons through third-party companies.
Oh, yeah.
Before. And is that part of this case or something completely different?
Oh, you mean about the spy planes, right? Yeah. So
yeah,
they so the RAF, the Royal Air Force, which is the UK Air Force, were doing these flights from December 2023 to July 2025. So until recently. And they always turn their transponder off over the sea. They went from RAF Akrotiri, which is the UK based on Cyprus, and like a 40-minute flight time from Gaza. They turned their transponder off over the sea, so you couldn't see what it was doing over Gaza. Then we found that this plane, we saw a plane going over Gaza. We tracked it back to RAF Akrotiri, and then saw that it wasn't operated by the RAF, and it was operated by this company called Sierra Nevada Corporation, which is a US company. It was a very weird story, and then it transpired. So at that point, we published that story. And at that point, we didn't know who the contractor was. So I thought it might be the Americans or the Israelis or the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, because anyone can get one of these can rent one of these planes. And then, but subsequent to that story being published, the mainstream media got interested in the story for the first time, really. And the Times did 2 articles based on Ministry of Defense sources, like inside. And they revealed that the contractor was the UK. They said the insider said that the UK were doing it because they didn't have enough planes to carry on doing it themselves, so they had to rent this US plane. They also said that the information was going directly to the Israeli military and in real time. So when the plane was in the sky, which we didn't know up to that point, we kind of assumed it. But whenever the government were asked, where's this intelligence going? They'd always say, they'd literally only say it was going to the relevant authorities. And then if there was a subsequent question saying, what are the relevant authorities? They'd be like, well, we can't tell you. So, but why were they trying to cover up that it was going to the Israeli military? Because you're handing intelligence to the institution that is destroying Gaza, carrying out war crimes, carrying out genocide. So it's quite revelatory. The other interesting thing is that this footage which we got over Gaza of what this US plane, but contracted by the UK, was doing, that was again gave a sense of why they'd kept that flight path secret for like 18 months, because it showed that it was going around Khan Yunis in the south of Gaza for an hour and a half, and circling. And no, the Israeli government itself didn't think the hostages were in Khan Yunis, and actually Khan Yunis at that point was the center of the fighting. Now that's interesting because the government, whenever they had to defend these flights, they always said, well, it's for hostage rescue, and no one believed that, because even in January 2024 there was only 2 British hostages in Gaza, and then by sometime later, by the time it finished, even by July there were none. So, but this kind of showed that hostage rescue operation was complete rubbish, because they were going over Khan Yunis, which is where the fighting was. So likely it's an overflight for an Israeli military operation. So again, really like damning stuff, and I think clearly criminal as well. And then the other point is like they said, well, that we only give intelligence to the Israelis for them to use in hostage rescue. Okay, that's rubbish for a start, because how do you ensure that? Do you send an email?
Well, they haven't managed to rescue anyone, anyways.
Well, they did rescue some, but now they're all out. But they killed nearly 300 Palestinians in the Nusayrat massacre. Okay. But they always said, well, we hand it to the intelligence Israelis, but they can only use it for hostage rescue. But how does that work? It's been given in real time. what are they doing? Are they sending an email alongside saying, please only use this for hostage rescue? And then when you privatize it, and it's a US company doing it, you have even less way of ensuring that what the Israelis are getting, because this company is another layer of complexity to the relationship. Is there a UK way of ensuring that the company is not giving stuff they shouldn't? I don't know. But anyway, it's all very, very murky, and I think that it was done, I think, to conceal the program, because they were coming under increasing heat about it. Because these American planes, you couldn't track them taking off or landing. The only way we found it was when it was in flight. So, and I think that they ironically blew up the whole program and made it a major story, because this new pilot that had been trained, this American pilot, I guess, forgot to turn his transponder off. So the whole program was revealed.
That's amazing. Thank
It's
you
interesting,
for that. Yeah.
But like that footage that we got, which people can find online, it should be evidence in a war crimes trial, because. And like, if you look, like the UK RAW, just conclude with this, like Al Jazeera did some work on this story, and they found that 47% of all surveillance flights over Gaza were flown by the RAF, which was more than double Israel itself, which was at 20%. UK was at 47%. So that is a major role, and it wasn't covered at all by the mainstream media. It wasn't covered that much by the anti-genocide movement, unfortunately, but it's much more important in many ways than the weapons side, which was the bit that got covered by the media and the movement itself. So, but again, it will all keep coming out. Just got to keep plugging away.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Matt. And
it's
thank you so much
for how the press is raiding, suppressing the independent media, independent journalism. That talks also about them. You know, when we see you have evidence of a war crime in a genocide, and the BBC does not report this with such an infrastructure, or the Guardian doesn't report this. It's very interesting to observe how they are great suppressors of truthful information in the outer public interest. But let's move now to another criminal, Epstein. So we have seen.
Do you want to stay or do you want to go?
I'm going to go.
Okay.
I can't handle Jeffrey Epstein, man. I've read enough too much about it. But interestingly, like, you should talk about the fact that, I don't know if you saw this email where Epstein said that he had been, Chomsky had visited Lula and he'd called Epstein and they'd talked. Did you see that?
Yeah, we've seen that. Yeah,
it's quite interesting. I thought that was quite shocking, but yeah.
Yeah, especially for people who like Chomsky.
Yeah,
this is Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald, he is, I don't know who is paying him, but he is being a great asset to the American far right in discrediting Brazilian democracy. I wouldn't say not even Lula, but Brazilian democracy. He's been trying to stigmatize Brazilian Supreme Court as authoritarian. Well, Bolsonaro will be in jail for a very good reason. He plotted a coup d'etat. He financed the coup d'etat. He tried to put the military on the streets. And I think this is the type of people that where prisons are the right place for them. And American justice was incapable of putting Trump where he should be, of making him accountable for his numerous crimes, even here with Epstein. So Brazilian justice was ahead of the American justice system, much more so. And Glenn Greenwald likes to sell the idea of absolute rights. There is no such a thing, absolute right. By definition, Matt, if you have a right, you have a right to dignity, so have I. And if your words are dismissive of my dignity or defamation, that's where your freedom stops. Let's say we cannot put porn on 12 o'clock in an open TV because they are children's right. So free press is not an absolute right, is a right limited by others' rights, values and principle. And Glenn Greenwald uses this flag along with the far right to discredit anything Brazilian, anything that has to do with Brazilian democracy. And Mark Schellenberger were trying to even claim that the US should intervene militarily in Brazilian sovereignty. I think Glenn Greenwald is a despicable, authoritarian, I don't know if you could call him a journalist, because all he's been doing right now is libel, defamation. I had the unfortunate to meet him in Brazil in such a narcissistic show where he had someone to put makeup on him, put his clothes on. I think he's doing a complete disfavor to Brazilian democratic environment, and I wonder how much money he's getting for that.
All right, on that bombshell, I'm gonna roll out.
Thank you so much.
Nice to see you guys.
Us.
Congrats on the new show. It's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Care. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
So, Ileana, I think we need to talk about this other criminal called, whoa, where are we?
We're here.
We're here. We need to talk to our audience about Epstein. We now have evidence, leaked emails that connects Jeff Epstein claiming Donald Trump knew about the girls, quote unquote, and spent hours with, quote, victims. So Epstein, so Trump, look at the designation of those girls, who they are. They were sex slaves. They were victims of human trafficking. So we have the US Congress moving to force on the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files, thousands of documents. And in the meantime, a new trove of hacked emails is exposing our far darker, largely ignored side of this network. Epstein deep entanglement with Israeli power intelligence, US intelligence. So we're talking about something very severe. So drop site news, drawing on the US House Oversight Committee, also, as he said, mainly there are public information here that nobody had looked at, or I don't know why. And they report that Yoni Corin, a veteran Mossad operative and longtime aide to former Israeli Prime Minister and Defense Minister Ehud Barak, stayed for extended periods at Jeffrey Epstein Manhattan townhouse several times between 2013 and 2015. He visited Epstein's home in Florida, in New York, over 30 times, even after Epstein had been convicted of abusing a minor. And he also was a frequent guest in Epstein's New York apartment, certainly not to drink coffee or whiskey, but they host meetings, according to these emails, with figures such as former CIA Director Leon Panetta. So it's important to say that Corin, this Mossad spy who were a friend and close friend, I'll call close friend from Epstein, he serves as Barak bureau chief at the Israel Defense Ministry. He remained in the reserve, and he continued even after Barak left office as an informal go between US and Israeli intelligence agents. That's what the emails are showing. And he was including relying messages between Barak and Israel military intelligence agencies. So at the same time, Barak himself and Epstein were also in contact, plotting political strategies, business deals, back channel talks, and Barak even sent Epstein a Citibank wire instructions for Corin's name. So there's evidence even of payment. So it's this sex trafficker, Epstein. He was acting as an informal liaison, arranging meetings, passing on information. It's from Russian political circles. He was helping to draft messages for Barak, diplomatic efforts in securing. They were trying to secure Russian support for the removal of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. This is meddling in international politics at the highest level. So, and we remember that Virginia Dufresne, this heroine that came with the story, who committed suicide earlier this year, she wrote in her posthumous book that a prime minister brutally raped her on Epstein private Caribbean island. She was 18. She describing left bleeding by this man from the mouth, from the anus, from the vagina, and he had tried to strangle her. Everything indicating that this figure is widely understood to be Barak, who denies it. So I think taken together, what we have here is the picture not just of a billionaire predator, a human trafficker, a sex slaving women, but a man operating as an informal asset, not a formal agent, but an informal asset of Israeli intelligence. And it's very interesting because the journalist Hussein, who broke this information, said, sometimes I didn't know if Mossad was serving Epstein or Epstein was serving Mossad. It was difficult to tell. And well, we need to remember that so far we just treated Epstein relationship with Israeli intelligence agency and Mossad and as a speculation. First was conspiracy theory, then came out that Ghislaine Maxwell was the daughter of the Robert Maxwell. He is a media mogul, and it's widely alleged that he has been a Mossad asset. So it was
MI5, right?
Yeah, then it was treated as an MI5, and it was treated as a speculation. Now I think no one can claim ignorance. And you bear in mind, you don't need to be a formally on the payroll to work for them. We have the figure of mercenaries widely spread, and they probably preferred ones because they are hidden. You can't really claim, oh look, they are on the payroll of Mossad, they are on the payroll of MI5. Well, these are people doing extremely elite, high-level work for secret agencies around the world, and that's what came up with Epstein. I don't know what's your take on that. What do you think this will mean for the US?
I mean, I think we have to put it in the context that this is how intelligence works. We have to remember that covert operations is very much part of intelligence. Often when we look at these US puppet heads of states, right, we're like, why are they cooperating with the US against the interests of their country, against, how did they get compromised? And it makes sense that there is an organized crime element to the coercion that the US empire exerts on the world, right? So intelligence, especially if there's no overhead, there's no oversight, something like this, CIA, Mossad, involved in this types of projects, it is sort of a given. This is their playbook. How do they gather intelligence? How do they infiltrate elite circles? How do they maintain control and power? So again, it is significant in that we're actually seeing behind the scenes as to how they might be doing this through mechanisms like Epstein, who has ties, like we're saying, across all the elite and, former presidents like Bill Clinton, also, Prince Andrew here in the UK, etc. And I'm sure many, many others that we don't know of.
Oh, no, Prince Andrew, commoner Andrew Mountbatten now.
Andrew
Mountbatten.
His alibi was his alibi was that he was in Pizza Express. So obviously he's a commoner. He was practicing to be a commoner. So he has access to all these elites, and that is very much the playbook of intelligence. I think it's not a surprise, like you're saying. There's always been, ever since the first revelations of Epstein, which, remember, like you said, he was a convicted sex offender and still throwing lavish parties. I remember Chelsea Handler went to one of his parties famously. So there's a lot to suggest that all these people are compromised that came in contact with him and were useful for intelligence. Like, this makes sense. However, like you're saying rightly, that drop site is actually providing evidence of these links. So we can now put it as, like, a lot of people are like, oh, this is a conspiracy theory. It's like, yes, it was a conspiracy theory. Now we have actual evidentiary documents to prove that conspiracy was correct. It was a real conspiracy. So does it mean mean anything in terms of Trump and his supporters and the general public's view of Trump? I don't think so, really. I'm not sure if it's discrediting. It's obviously it's discrediting, but does his base care about these types of accusations?
I think they do. I think they do. I think the Republican. It's one. I would say, Ileana, there are two real cracks within the MAGA. Within the MAGA, we're talking about a crack within the system. I think one is Israel is dividing MAGA. We've seen Charlie Kirk, we've seen Candace Owens, we're seeing Tucker Carlson. It's impressive that I agree with Kirk and Carlson. Not in a million years, I would think they would have. And I think the other one is really the sex trafficking, because I think one of key known theories were the Democrats were leading a pedophile ring. I think this is outrage for any human being with decency, empathy. We want justice for those victims. And we don't want any more victims, and we don't want people exploiting power under the guise of anonymity and impunity. That's an anonymous circle. I don't know if you've seen Eyes Wide Shut from Stanley Kubrick, but the same crimes that are punished in society as a whole within the circle with people with masks, their anonymity grants them, and the control and it's like a sect, it's like a cult, the cult control. And that's how they operated, and total impunity. I think that outrages every human being with decency or who doesn't agree with that. But I think the American hardcore MAGA is extremely on top of that, moralistic.
Maybe. I mean, certainly, I think from the outside,
they're having pushing Trump to do something about this, and Trump said, "Yes, we're going to do this." But now he's everywhere. He's part of it. He's becoming undeniably part of it. And I think this is something that could. I don't know the extent. That's what I'm asking you, because in America, I think you lived in America, and I've been there for one time 6 days, and I took the airplane before because I was feeling a bit anguished. But I think he will have trouble with that. Imagine this church-going people hearing that.
We've seen so many. Okay, so two things. I would just be the devil's advocate there. We've seen so many instances. Stormy Daniels, remember the porn star that he was involved in the campaign allocation funds, like the inappropriate funding from his campaign to Stormy Daniels. We saw just before he was elected, the Entertainment Tonight tape or something where he talked about grabbing women by their, we've seen so many things that people claim will fell Trump, will be his downfall in terms of this moralistic framing, and none of them have come to pass. So there is that possibility. If they were certainly morally consistent, then yes, there should be some consequences. Just that historically speaking, we haven't seen that to be the case. Like the MAGA base is very, very almost cult-like. I would say cult-like in their hope, and like false hope, but hope in him. It's very much there. But I do think, though, that externally, again, this idea of the decline of empire, the decline of any sort of leadership that can be taken seriously. We had Gustave Petro, the president of Colombia, who we talked about in I think this is a real speech that he gave, calling him
amazing speech. I think this speech needs. But I think you're absolutely right. Trump has an enormous ability to deflect and to deny facts. I haven't seen this he doubles down. If somebody accuses him, he doubles down, and he becomes even more vicious. I'm not finding Petro just now because I'm talking, but when you're talking, I'm going to find this. People, I'm not good at technology, but we'll play this video from Gustavo Petro. But on the other hand, we are not talking about just a man over a woman's skirt. We are talking about a human traffic ring and I think if Trump manages to say it's fake news, I haven't been there, if he manages to refute the facts, I think he has a good chance. But if people understand those facts to be true, I think he'll have a little bit of trouble, don't you think so? I'm going to try to find Petro in the meantime.
I honestly don't know, because of the polarized elements of the US public discourse. Like it's existential, the way that they've been made to fight against each other versus fight against the root of the problem, which is capitalism. So that issue, I mean, it's so alive that I don't know whether or not this can really change people's minds, because it's become a whole identity and a whole belief system. It might not be enough. It'll be like, well, because the other thing is, it's already well known that Trump and Epstein know each other, that he spent time in Mar-a-Lago.
Look, I speak Spanish, I speak Spanish with the English Mar-a-Lago. It just sounds really. I got Petro here with us. Shall we? Look what Petro. I love Petro. Did I tell you that I met Petro personally? He came. Yes, he received us in the Assange campaign, and he was so simple with his sweater, so thoughtful, hearing with a lot of attention. I was humbled by his humbleness.
Oh, wow. That's
like an elegant, quiet, thoughtful, and reflective man, and very humble. And it's beautiful because Petro always received the civil society in his palace. He's very open to this. He was the first president to say yes to WikiLeaks, the very first one.
Wow.
And you see the victims from the war on terror/drugs from Trump, he received each one of them. He said, this is a poor family. This is a family who struggles in the daily life. They're workers, and they have been stigmatized by Trump. I have all my respect for Gustavo Petro. I have to say, I wish I was Colombian to have him as a president. Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Sorry, Lola.
Claro, de pedófilos quiere acabar la democracia en Colombia. Duro, sí. Pero ahí está la realidad. Y para que no salga la lista, entonces nos envían acorazados a matar pescadores de esta ciudad. Y amenazar al vecino, que si dictador o no, ¿cómo que el pueblo de Colombia va a aplaudir que invadan a su hermano, que no es el presidente, sino el pueblo de Venezuela? ¿Cuándo? Seríamos así de traidores y de vendidos, de que nuestra propia sangre la traicionamos, o el pueblo del Ecuador, o el pueblo de Panamá, o el pueblo de Venezuela no es nuestro propio pueblo. Y entonces quieren que el presidente haga lo que quería hacer Duque, cobarde, prestar las tierras de Colombia para que desde ahí se invadiera a un país hermano que tiene la misma historia que nosotros, porque allá nació Bolívar y vino a morir aquí, en esta ciudad. No se puede. Presidente de Colombia que haga eso, presidente maldito por las generaciones futuras, porque nunca será olvidado como un traidor. Y yo no pertenezco a los que querían matar a Bolívar. El gobierno de Venezuela ha hecho muchas críticas, pero no me burlo del pueblo de Venezuela, ni construyo una trampa para que caiga el pueblo de Venezuela en la trampa de una invasión que solo va por su petróleo. Que se quiere es codicia y violencia más para hacer de esta esquina hermosa del continente suramericano una Siria, un Irak, una Libia llena de esclavos, de venta de esclavos, de nuevo negros. No, la lista de los amigos de Epstein, que no quiere que aparezca la lista en los Estados Unidos, nos quiere utilizar aquí con la violencia para que el pueblo de los Estados Unidos no piense en su propio gobierno, sino que se le suba la xenofobia, el racismo, las ideas de la raza superior y otras ideas falsas, y nos usan para no discutir sus propios problemas. El presidente de Colombia lo que ha hecho es denunciar narcotraficantes durante décadas. Y los narcotraficantes que ha denunciado siempre estuvieron en el poder político de Colombia, en el Estado.
Absolutely right, yeah. So, Ileana, it's such a beautiful speech, and that evokes on me something that I think will resonate with the entire Global South. We have a history of resistance. We have I'd say South America has a revolutionary history as well, especially the Spanish countries. But in Brazil, we have the largest social movement in the world, which is the movement, the landless movement. So we do have a vein for autonomy. We have this desire, but we have a very strong history. If you see Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, we have been resisting the US empire fiercely. I would say my parents, they spent their youth fighting the dictatorship in Brazil, which was supported by the CIA. They lost friends. One of their friends was thrown out of an airplane. His body was thrown out of an airplane. Others were tortured. They never seen them again. They don't know where their bodies are. This is written in our veins. We have that. And the US ignores that. They think we're just a bunch of cockroach ignorance with no culture and apply their superiority towards us. And I think this is not only for South America. I think it's for China. I think it's for Southeast Asia. I think it's for Africa. And I think people that are watching us from the Global South will feel this way. We have our strong ancestral culture. In Brazil, we have 200 surviving indigenous people that have been here before any white one. Africa has a millennial culture. South Asia, the world is big, diverse, and should be so. And we don't want American supremacists. We have different ways to live our political system, to understand democracy, to understand human rights. We do have different visions than that. Some communities in Afghanistan don't have the concept of private property. It's so interesting that the world is so diverse, and I think Petro represents well this Latin American fierceness and culture and historical dignity and memory, and I think this ignorance is what makes the empire cracks in a way.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing to note is Colombia also entered the BRI this year as well. So the BRI, again, the Belt and Road Initiative with China. Again, the thing about China, and just thinking back about our conversation with Matt, sometimes China is like very misunderstood in the global north, especially with its development projects under the Belt and Road Initiative, across Africa and Latin America. But it really is a genuine alternative to imperialist structures, and has, in fact, been instrumental in helping the rise of the Global South, because each country has finally an alternative to US IMF loans, World Bank, all these things. And so they can choose how to develop their country. And as we said, development has been really co-opted by capitalism to mean exploitative practices. And that's why a lot of people in the global north think that China is equally exploitative, but it's under a very different type of system, something that, in the future, I'm sure we'll talk more on to sort of explain what the differences are and why it is fundamentally different from anything that these countries have gotten from Western imperialism for 400 years. So it really does, it's a harbinger of really, I think, a hopeful and optimistic time where multilateralism multilateralism is actually on the horizon. So yeah, so we can sort of like close this chapter of Epstein, right? Unless you have anything else to say.
I think we can close this piece of shit. And Ileana, I think people are very eager, me too, to understand Japan and China tensions.
Okay.
We know there is a historical background that if they had a Bible, we would be reading in the Bible, but yeah.
Right.
How Japan numerous times humiliated China. It's complex. It's complex history, but I think you are bringing here one of aspects of Japan seeing itself as an imperialist force and against China. Could you please expand a little bit on that for us? The Japan blasting over remarks on Taiwan.
Yeah. Okay, so I think it's important here to note, because there will be confusion, that when I'm talking about the global north, I'm talking about the US empire, according to the Tricontinental Dossier, Hyperimperialism, a decadent, dangerous new stage. And Japan, in that framing and categorization, because of its active participation in fascism and imperialism, in World War II and after World War II, it's folding into the US empire. Japan is part of the global north. So that's important to understand here. And also, as I go over this, this week, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, I'm sorry for pronouncing it wrong, broke with years of precedent last Friday by hinting in Parliament that Japan could provide military support for Taiwan under certain worst-case scenarios, such as a Chinese attack on the Democratic Island. Okay, so already there we have several U.S. propaganda talking points about Taiwan. We have to remember that Taiwan is used as a flashpoint for U.S. war drive against China. Taiwan has a very complicated history within a context that it's a very long history, but the thing is, right as we stand, Taiwan and China are considered to be under one country, two governance. So this is accepted internationally. Almost all countries, the majority of countries absolutely accept this as a fact, including the US, who Nixon in 1972 normalized relations with mainland China and recognized mainland China as the real China and not Taiwan, which is just a small island with 22 million people. So you have to understand that, like, wider historical context. And for people who want to know more about Taiwan's history, I really, really recommend looking at the Chao Collective's, the Chao Collective website. It really, if you can find it or I can find it, it really gives you a really good overview of the history of Taiwan and starts really way back, like thousands of years ago, and how it relates to China. So it's by no means is this like independent democratic country that is going to be invaded by China. This is just simply not true. Also, just even Taiwan as a democratic, independent country, again, the issue is the US. US is backing a lot of elements of so-called separatism in Taiwan. As usual, this is their normal playbook. And also, even the thing about Taiwan, again, is that it is really the result of a civil war. And the KMT that basically started the modern Taiwan, essentially, after 1949, where the Chinese Communist Party, the Communist Party of China, is won the People's Revolution, and the KMT lost, and they moved to Taiwan, basically took over Taiwan. And I'm sorry if I'm saying that all wrong, but you can look up the history. So before that, Japan colonized Taiwan for 50 years. That's why this prime minister is saying this type of rhetoric as if, and then she actually goes on to say that if battleships are used and a naval blockade involves the use of troops, I believe that would by any measure constitute a survival threatening situation for Japan. And she is evoking this idea of defense when talking about Taiwan, which is a separate country. And like I said, a country that Japan had colonized. And also remembering too that Japan's fascist imperialist rampage across East Asia and Southeast Asia resulted in, some would estimate, about 30 million deaths in that region, including the Nanjing massacre, so-called massacre, but it's really a genocide that resulted in over 300,000 deaths. It was incredibly brutal, and there's a movie about that just this year. But here she's evoking this idea of like defense and peace through strength, which is mirroring Pete Hegseth here, who we can see on screen. He's talking about peace through strength, and he is addressing troops in Japan. Now, to give another further context of what the heck is he doing in Japan, addressing Japanese troops, there are about 53,000 US troops in Japan. That is the biggest amount of US troops in the entire world. The second one is Germany, and the third is South Korea. So we're looking at like an incredible subservience to US, I suppose. Germany is at 35,000 and South Korea is at 24,000 troops, US troops on. So can we even say that Japan can act independently? No. And here they're not acting independently at all. I mean, they're completely reiterating US talking points to further an escalation against China, because again, like I said, US is looking for war with China by 2027.
And how China respond to that? Because China, how would you say they respond to that?
Well, I would say there's one snafu here. I did not actually get this clip, but China had a very good response, and
I think you do have the
we had a good response. We also had a not so good response that was promptly deleted. It was escalatory and it was deleted, I think, from the Chinese official in Japan. But this is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's a very strong statement, but it's more diplomatic than the other one that was deleted. So here he says that.
Do you want me to go back to that one?
Should we just play it?
Yeah, let's just play it.
Yeah.
Let's put what's going on here. Oh, gotta give me a moment. I don't know what's going on here. Because China tends to be far more, by the way, if you're watching us, make sure you subscribe, make sure you like.
日本领导人
Let's hear him.
日前在国会公然发表涉台错误言论，暗示武力介入台海可能性，粗暴干涉中国内政，严重违背一个中国原则、中日4个政治文件精神和国际关系基本准则，同日本政府迄今所做的政治承诺严重不符，性质和影响极其恶劣。中方对此强烈不满，坚决反对，已向日方提出严正交涉和强烈抗议。台湾是中国的台湾，以何种方式解决台湾问题，实现国家统一，纯属中国内政，不容任何外部势力干涉。日方领导人有关言论，到底想向台独势力发出何种信号？是否企图挑战中方核心利益，阻挠中国统一大业？究竟想把中日关系引向何方？今年是中国人民抗日战争及世界 反法西斯战争胜利80周年，也是台湾光复80周年。日本曾对台湾实行殖民统治，犯下罄竹难书的罪行。日本当政者妄图介入台海事务，既是对国际正义的践踏，对战后国际秩序的挑衅，也是对中日关系的严重破坏。中国终将统一，也必将统一。中国人民有坚定的意志、充分的信心、足够的能力，坚决粉碎一切插手和阻挠中国统一大业的图谋。中方敦促日方立即停止干涉中国内政，停止挑衅越线，不要在错误的道路上越走越远。
Ileana, it feels out of line out of their standard for China diplomacy. They tend to be far more selective and subtle. He's talking about strong words for China reunification. He's talking about egregious. He calls the aggression provocative. He's naming things by its name. What happened here?
I mean, I think usually I would say two things. One, China's actually become a lot more assertive on the world stage in the past few years. So that's one thing. But the other thing is a lot of what he's saying is not actually aggressive or unusual. In fact, every single year, it is well known amongst Taiwanese people, people in Taiwan, I would say, and also people in mainland China, that they will have a peaceful reunification. And the time of that reunification is really in like 2049. I mean, that is the projected time frame that they're supposed to be working towards. And the reason is China's projection of that time is that by that time, there will be more democratic socialists. They will actually be they're working on a modern socialist country, and they will have more democratic means of mechanisms by that time, because they've reached a level of development and a level of high income for really, they're looking at moderate prosperity now, and they want like high income for everyone. Basically, a high income country is what they're going for by that time. That's what they're projecting that time to be.
And why is it so important for China to have a reunification with Taiwan? Look at Taiwan, so small. China so big. China so populated. Taiwan.
It's not important for China. You know, in terms of tangible, measurable things, it isn't important for China, as in China doesn't need Taiwan. Taiwan needs China. But just to be clear, China does not actually need Taiwan. But the fact is, Taiwan is part of China. Like, it's been part of China for like 1,000 years. It's been part of the sort of regional different factions, you know, before China became the country that it is now. For thousands of years, it was part of the trade route and different sort of under different like warlords and different dynasties. And it was officially under Fujian province from the middle of the 1600s. So it was officially part of Fujian province for like 200 years, and then Japan came and colonized it for 50 years. So it's always been like, you know, the people in Taiwan now are Chinese. I mean, Taiwanese, the language, as much as they like to say it's their own language and their own culture, Taiwanese is pretty much the same as Fujian, which is where my family is from. So I have family in Taiwan, I have family in mainland China, and I have family in Hong Kong. I mean, because these are all part of China. So that is very important. That is just a well-known thing. We are the same people. Like, that's the idea.
Like a colonial threat to have this part separated. It would be extension of the aggressions.
That's the other thing, is that the U.S. has openly called Taiwan the unsinkable battleship. So it's, again, another one of these like flashpoints for the U.S. trying to use Taiwan, trying to use Tibet and different parts of the Middle East, obviously Israel, etc., as this place to attack other countries within that region and to attack China. So there's a security issue, but there's like a real cultural, resonant, genuine like issue that we're the same people. And then, you know, like you're saying, there's a diplomatic reason, there's a political reason as well. But we look at Taiwan. Taiwan definitely needs China. China's their biggest trading partner. I mean, Taiwan is only 22 million people. It's a very small population, and obviously going to be overrun by U.S. agendas and U.S. interests, which you can see that it is already by the current president. Lai Ching-te, his remarks about APAC. When APAC came to visit Taiwan, he was like, so praising APAC, the Israel lobby, that he's just a complete US puppet, essentially.
And how important is Taiwan in the US war against China? How crucial it is?
I think there's two reasons why it's crucial. One is crucial because rhetorically, it's still one of the few places, because the Hong Kong color revolution didn't really work, right? So now the Taiwan one, they're trying to be like, it's a democratic, they want freedom. They're still using that rhetoric. I don't know how much it's really working, because realistically, the Taiwanese military is not prepared for any war against China. They know that. And I think even the
certainly not, yeah.
I mean, I think they can do like basic maths there and realize how stupid that would be. So they're really depending on the US to fight that war for them. I don't think they're prepared in any way to be the actual proxy. So I think that is, it seems a little bit unlikely. But the other reason, of course, is the semiconductors. Taiwan had like over 80% of the semiconductors were being produced in Taiwan. Now, the US is trying to diversify, and that's actually why Japan is sort of entering the picture with their rhetoric as well. Not only are they in alliance with the US, they also do have an interest in these semiconductor chips, and they also are part of a new agreement with the US.
And looking at this map that you're putting here, US troops present by country, it's incredible the amount of US troops in Japan.
Yes.
I don't think this is very publicized. Germany, yes, we know. I lived in Germany.
I think a lot of people outside of Germany don't know how big the US bases are in Germany.
No, they don't. Yeah.
Germany is obvious, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Germany is number 2. Japan is number 1.
Yeah, guess why?
Yeah, exactly. Because of China. And then again, South Korea is number 3, which again, guess why? Because of China and North Korea. So
and I mean, China certainly knows this is the latest statements by the Japanese president, fully ideological alignment with American fascism. Let's start talking about not MAGA, but American fascism. They know it's a provocation by proxy as well. I mean, Japan has its own interests, but yeah, you rightly said, but it might be more difficult to call a revolution here. You need a Zelensky, you need a clown to help you out. I mean,
Taiwan does have a clown, to be clear.
Okay.
They have a clown. That's why he was talking so highly of APAC. But the situation is that China is not Russia. Russia felt very much provoked. And I think the analysis there was that it would escalate, the issue in Ukraine would escalate, and they should act then when they did, rather than wait for it to escalate further. China needs to not engage in any military conflict. That's actually in their best interest, to just allow the US to continue to decline on its own and to continue to work on their productive forces within their country and work on their agreements and alliances with different Global South countries to strengthen Global South in general is the best, most productive strategy.
Yeah,
right?
you took a very interesting point, because China philosophy, Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, it's in the general, the Chinese culture towards war is the best war is not that one that you use your resources most effectively. It's the war that you don't need to fight, that you dissuade your enemy to fight. So it's an incredibly different strategy than the US. US is applying use of force, and the Chinese mentality is also that non-action is a huge action. Silence is a huge action. And I don't think China will go into a war they don't know if they're going to win. I think this is also part of the mentality. If one day we hear that China has gone to war, I would say they had no whatsoever option left, and they know they're going to win. I would say so.
And they will not strike first. They just absolutely don't have a strike first.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
Just looking at the comments here, someone's saying, guess no one reads the chat at all, which I've been reading. And also, why would anyone want to be used in proxy war unless forced? Yes, absolutely. No one would, in theory, want to be used in a proxy war. But like, as we have discussed earlier with Matt Kennard, the three pillars of power and coercion that the U.S. empire uses across the world. One is military, one is financialization, and the third one is propaganda. So sometimes you do get propagandized, captured populations that involve themselves in, with legitimate gripes. That's how color revolutions kind of take root, is they have legitimate gripes, but the solution that they present is always incorrect with a color revolution. It's not a solution. So, but that's how you capture a population. And then, of course, you install a puppet's head that will do your bidding, that has its own self-interest, either through Epstein type of coercion or through a lot of money. I mean, next week, I think we will be covering the Ukraine corruption scandals that are coming out. We've always known that Ukraine is greatly corrupt, but there are some revelations that are coming out now, and we have to think about why. But I think next week we will cover that. But certainly, those are the reasons why a country would involve itself in a proxy.
Absolutely.
So hello, ode to John Trudeau.
Yeah, we hope we contemplated you. We had very interesting commentary here as well. And there was another one just lost in the chat. But you know what? Shall we move to the COP30, or are we still exploring?
Yes, let's move on, because this is
I have a video. If you have any calming pills, I would suggest that you use them now. Look at this video. I can't believe the British hypocrisy has no boundaries whatsoever. Look who is arriving in the COP. How beautiful.
Oh my gosh.
Gentlemen. A dream come true. Look at that.
Oh my gosh.
Together with his brown nose, Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer, you probably never heard of him, never seen him. He is the new British Prime Minister by the new Labour Party. He is training himself to be the new Tony Blair. And well, he is an absolute opaque figure, funded by Zionism, put into power by Zionism, as we discussed here last week. DeclassifiedUK and Matt Kennard did an enormous job in uncovering Keir Starmer's deep relationships with Israel. And there is more to that. He's launching the unprecedented war on terror on journalism here in the UK. And he's sucking up to Prince Williams, who I understand has genuine concerns about the environment. But I'll tell you what are the concerns of Keir Starmer, the level of hypocrisy you see here. Before we go into the facts, let's analyze his speech. Look at what he's talking about. It's such a setup, this thing here that I'm going to share with you. You get an Oxford, probably you have an Oxford student, first student, and they with a different ethnicity to show how cosmopolitan and welcoming Britain is. And look what he says about the COP, and then we go to the facts.
So I know you're going to COP30 in a couple of days. Where do you see the biggest opportunity for the UK to become a world leader in sustainability?
It's really important that the UK remains a leader in relation to climate change. Very important that we go and show that the United Kingdom cares about this. The most important thing is making the case for countries to continue to work together on this. The obligation to protect the planet is huge and urgent, but there are great opportunities as well in relation to the jobs of the future.
So I know you're going to COP30 in a couple of days.
Ileana, I don't need to say to you, this is not scripted at all. No, this is not rehearsed. It was one take. In one take, they nailed it. Yes, yes. Oh, absolutely. Oh, so natural, isn't that?
Can you explain to us how the UK is a leader? Apparently,
I'll tell you how the UK is a leader. So we have the COP30 now in Brazil, my land here, right next to me. I think Brazil is the COP is being called by Brazilian social movements as the corporate green coup, not because it is here, but because it is its nature, latest nature. And we have the Brazilian agribusiness heavily financing the COP, but there are good intentions. It's not all black and white. But in any case, the COP, the Conference of the Parties of the UN Climate Convention, is taking place here in Brazil, Belém, from the 10th until the 21st of November. And one of the main goals is to secure climate aid. So this is also referred as an international climate finance. The aim is to reach 1.3 trillion per year in climate investments by 2035. So this is about funding climate action in countries that have been historically subjected to extractivism by the industrialized nations. I don't like the term developed countries. I think it's prejudicial, it's charged with racism, and it's also not telling, because would you say China is a developing country?
Yes, China is actually.
Traditionally, you'd say China's a developing. No,
but it is. It's like it is a developing country. It just gave up its status as a developing country under the WTO.
Well, and developed towards what, Ileana? Developed towards being like the empire. No, we have our own path. We are not developing towards anything.
I mean, I think that's a different definition of development.
Yeah. So I will reject this definition. And so, but this is about restitution and climate justice, because after years and years of exploitation of the global south to industrialize the global north, it means that these countries are where the most vulnerable population are to climate crisis, to disasters. They are concentrated there. And that's where the majority of world's indigenous people live and deserve protection, deserve to have their lives conserved. And barely has this COP started, countries like the US, UA are already sabotaging it. I don't know if they have a fossil prize of the day. You went to the UK for this amazing obstructive work of UK delegates in the COP. So the US is notably absent. And bear in mind, it was very important that the US came, because they need to contribute towards the 100 billion goal. So Trump administration withdrew from the Paris Protocol agreement, and it's not participating at all in the climate finance, in this funding, and they are one of the main polluters in the world. There is the polluter pay principle. If you pollute, you pay. If you are industrialized, you pay. If you are destroying forests around the globe, you pay. If your corporations is infiltrating mining and petrol, you have to pay. I think, it's an environmental principle, even in the UK. So, and the European Union is the one paying this fund, basically. The UK government, of course, cheated. Keir Starmer cheated to meet the climate target to this fund. Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, claimed that the UK would triple its spending on adaptation finance by 2025, comparison to the 2019 levels. And he announced we reached 11.6 billion. It was a cheat. Carbon Brief has revealed that in order to achieve this figure, the UK relabel existing funds for multilateral development. So we have a fund for something else, a humanitarian aid fund, a private sector investment, and you relabeled it as climate finance. And then you inflate the figures without allocating funds. This is the Keir Starmer commitment to the future. And I think laborettes out there should know it. And look, and they made a calculation here without accounting. Their account is that the climate finance in actual figure was 2.5 billion. It was not 11.6 billion. And so in order to be 11.6 billion, it has to be 78% more than it is now. So they're cheating a number 78% more. They're letting the public know. Yeah. And here is Keir Starmer walking down the red carpet of COP, traveling with Prince William, and then directing his delegates to bear decisions. So, and that's not all. UK will not contribute directly to Brazil's Tropical Forest Forever facility because we are having fiscal constraints and budget deficits. Let me tell you where this money is going. So the Labour government now is cut the aid from 0.5 gross national income to 0.3 in February, ostensibly to fund defense spending.
God.
To make war. So successively, I mean, not only Labour, but predecessors have always been cutting International Climate Fund.
Yeah, and let's just point out that war is...
saying otherwise. He's not saying climate's a hoax. He's saying he's doing triple, when in reality, he's 78% short. He is just, according to Carbon Facility, he is just cheating on figures to ignore. And you know what, Ileana? So sorry, you want to comment on something? I'm going to be.
Well, I just want to. I mean,
Yeah.
It's really disgusting because this is how he claims that he's the leader, that the UK is a leader in green initiative, and also just to really reiterate that war is one of the things which isn't even in any of the calculations behind, climate justice, climate initiative calculations under COP or under any other sort of like international climate initiative, right? And it is absolutely the biggest polluter, the biggest destroyer of the earth that we have. So all the genocides that the US empire is waging is, and that is why the
resource extraction in the end of the day.
Resource extraction, destruction, ammunitions, and also the Agent Orange, what I mean? Like there's all this, it's just absolutely disgusting what they're doing.
And you know what? Nothing more telling than environment destruction to illustrate colonial relationships or exploitational relationships, which today form part of what we call neocolonialism. Because what is neocolonialism? Well, we knew the colonialism, which is a formal governance by a state, by the metropolis. But here we are talking about by proxy, colonialism by proxy. Who is the proxy? This is the corporates. The corporations are the main sponsors of that. The COP are also operating through economical and fiscal exploitation of these peoples. Indigenous people have seen, for instance, large infrastructure projects, missionary, predatory extractivism open up what a brilliant anthropologist of Brazil, Viveiro de Castro, he described. We came and we opened up vast demographic deserts of epidemics, massacres, enslavement, expropriation, and not expropriation only of the environment, expropriation of their cosmological foundations, of their existence, of their cultural identity, and we need to understand that we have complicit in this. The global north is the total complicit in this.
It's more than complicit, right?
There is a dossier. It's called Complicit in Destruction. This dossier goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And one of them has a very hard figure that I want to bring here for you. It's around 55 billion in financing, loans, bonds, shares that flowed into 8 mining companies that are overlapping indigenous lands in Brazilian Amazon only between 2016 and 2025. So we are saying that they mapped out the banks and financial institutions funding the mining system that is illegally, because indigenous lands are protected by our constitution, and they do tricks. And I have to highlight the role of the British financial institutions in this, in sustaining companies involving in Amazon destruction, in particular HSBC and Barclays. Two of the UK's largest banks have financed and held share in multinational mining and trading companies linking to deforestation, contamination, illegal gold supply chains in the Amazon. Anglo-American, what a surprise. The London headquartered mining giant was found to hold hundreds of illegal mining permits in Brazil, overlapping with indigenous territory, including the Yanomami territory, which I have been now. I have a lot to tell about this territory. They almost committed a genocide. They were about to be extinguished. It's unbelievable. The woman being raped. Let's not forget someone else. Starlink, Elon Musk Starlink. It's an internet provider now under investigation in Brazil because they have facilitated activity in Amazonian territory of the Yanomami land. Yeah. So prosecutors seized dozens of terminals from illegal mining operations. Starlink's without a license operating there. So we need to talk about this. When we're talking about environmental destruction, it's for a very good reason that the global South needs to be held accountable.
Global North, the global North.
Yeah. Of course, we have our own internal colonizers. 66% of this 55 billion were a Brazilian own-making Vale, which has, of course, its branches all over the world, connections, joint enterprises with all. Then comes an Anglo-American, 17%. Then Rio Tinto, UK, Australia, Glencore, Switzerland, they are complicit in the destruction of Amazon. And we know, Matt Kennard just mentioned, Amazon, Southcom commander, Amazon has long been the center of geopolitical pressure. It's the last frontier of the accumulation of capital. And Amazon is treated as a national security issue for the U.S. Yeah, we've seen U.S. General Laura Richards outline the strategy for Latin America. Greater resource, we have to put our foot there. We have to get our foot there. She says this at one point in her video. This is an open declaration by a military U.S. leader, foreign leader, in a continent that's been plagued by CIA interventions. And so it's really complicated. But look at this. I have to say, I understand those indigenous people. Look at this video that went viral in the Brazilian media and should be viral worldwide. This is the Tapajós.
And just want to say that one of our comments was actually did say that the indigenous activists are currently blocking the entrance to COP30 per Reuters live stream. So I think they're still at COP, right?
Yeah.
So I think the thing that is kind of sad. Do you want to continue? Because I think the thing that's a little bit sad about this COP situation, which, as we said before, we talked about with Matt, often these international institutions, the international organizations infiltrated by U.S. imperialist agendas, they distort the utility of, what they're supposed to be for their function and purpose. But there is a reason why we would want to keep COP. And I think like Matt is sort of talking about is when you have a framework for accountability, and COP definitely can be a framework for accountability, because every country should be showing what they're supposed to achieve.
What you're saying is absolutely right. Even in form of protest is a form of accountability. These are Tapajós indigenous people. They have their very existence threatened by multinationals trying to privatize the river that give the name Tapajós River, the same name of their ethnicity. So they are fighting for their right to exist not only physically, but within their culture, within their beliefs, within their cosmological existence. So I think when they enter there, it's the moment of visibility to say, we don't want this train crossing our territory. We don't want the privatization of our waters and of our existence. We don't join the commodity system that capitalism is trying to impose us. So yeah, in a way, they should be sitting on a table, but if they aren't, this protest is going viral worldwide. It's a form of protest. It's a form of accountability. We now know about their suffering. And what Lula did, he went to Tapajós right after. So it's probably, it's the police, police was not violent with them, because they received instructions that they should not be violent. Brazilian police can be extremely violent. These are state forces. So I think, yes, slowly we can end this, but we need to highlight how is the global North hijacking the COP, as how corporations are trying to hijack. And we have the People's Summit right in front of the COP, with the social movements taking notes of everything that's happening, pushing, pressuring, and protesting. So I think it's beautiful that you have a visibility, a world visibility to talk about these issues. Yeah, I totally agree with you. We need to keep COP, but we need to keep COP within the lens of the Global South. It's so important that the Global South gives the tone. It's so important that President Lula says, we want Global North. You are responsible. You have been the historical polluter, and you need to help us to preserve our environment. You have extinguished all your rivers. If you travel to the UK, if you travel to Germany, there's not a single land there is natural beauty there is not being replanted. Let us preserve our what we have. We don't need to be constantly in extractivism involved. Yeah, so I think you are absolutely right. So I cut you. Go ahead.
No, yeah, I totally agree with that framing, and also just the fact that it is the global North, historically the polluter. Even currently, they outsource all their manufacturing pollution to global South countries, and then go, why is China have such high pollution rates when China is the one that's actually leading in green energy? So it's, again, almost across the board. It's very consistent in COP2 that the global North does that. Their targets are not ambitious enough, considering their historical and current contributions to global pollution, including wars, by the way. But they will divert attention and blame China or blame India or blame countries that do actually need to wait. They need to wait, and this is where the development conversation comes in. Development shouldn't be about exploitation, extraction, and corporate takeover, right? There is, and you can see this with China. It's complicated when you have socialism development. Like, there's complicated things you have to weigh and balance and negotiate. But essentially, when you're looking at extreme impoverishment, people who do not have access to medical services, or just, when we're talking about real underdevelopment, like China was 75 years ago, then development is absolutely necessary within the sovereignty and framework and socialist framework that China has achieved. And you can see that it's necessary for countries, especially extremely post-colonial countries that have been, the extraction has been like incredibly destructive to their entire material.
Let's not forget, Ileana, that gold is a commodity that condenses enormous values into small, transportable quantities, meaning that it effectively functions as a currency within the criminal economy and is later laundered through the European banks. Yeah, in the Yanomami case, the report Scars in the Forest of 2022 say that mostly of the gold was laundered in Europe and Dubai. So there is this other side of the mining, the destruction in loco, the destruction of nature, of people, the total destruction of social life, individual life. Then you have gold, very easy to launder. And being laundered in Brazil, but also being laundered in Europe, sent to Europe. And you see Megan Kelly in the end of her show saying, buy gold. Gold is safe. No, don't buy gold. Try not to buy gold. After I went to Yanomam land, I swear to God, I'm not buying gold anymore. It's such a horrific, it's blood.
Yeah.
We saw Sudan.
What's happening in Sudan? Yeah, exactly.
You brought the gold, destroying an entire existence of a civilization.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like one of the currencies of imperialism for sure. And but I would say going into this COP, and it isn't finished yet, but going into this COP, Brazil, really urged China to take a stronger role in this. And China, I think, met Brazil where it wanted by supporting Brazil's leadership within this COP. So as we said before, it's not so simple. There are global north agendas within COP that obviously Brazil needs to fight against, and whether it can or not, is like the ongoing struggle of the global south. But they had some key agreements going into before COP, where they have some energy agreements, corporations on biofuels, wind, solar, and green hydrogen. They also do have environmental agreements where Chinese satellites are to help Amazon deforestation, and also mineral agreements with rare earth and critical minerals. So we'll see, how that gets implemented. But essentially, those things are really important for green technology as well, which, as you just put up, China is actually very much the real leader in clean energy, not the UK. The UK is not a leader at all in clean energy.
Oh, but yeah, no, the UK is the greatest leader of the worldly world. Whatever. I don't know if this exists in English, but we say del mundo mundial, of the worldly world. UK is ahead of any country in the world with green technology, recycling at your home.
Yeah, according to Keir Starmer, the UK is. But actually, China is the leader of clean energy. And here we can see from Carbon Brief, the analysis that they actually, for the first time, I think this is 2024, they're referencing 2024.
And you know what the problem is with this, Ileana? Is because China is saying it is possible to have clean energy. You don't need to frack. Exactly. You don't need fracking. You don't need atom energy like Germany did after sanctioning Russia. China is saying, well, actually, different is possible. Oh, this is very threatening because they don't want to change.
I mean, I would say that there's been criticism of China continuing to use coal mines. But the thing is, as they transition into more clean energy, they still need to address the needs of their people. So it's not so simple let's just, close all the coal mines and then don't have energy, So they're transitioning. And the thing is, they are actually doing it. So that's why we're seeing things like that thing that you just put up, which is that the CO2 emissions actually went down for the first time.
This is for the skepticals. This is from the Bible of capitalism, The Economist. China cleans energy revolution will reshape politics and market.
So I actually want to show you this. I'm from this article. We actually had Carlos Martinez on last week, and he actually has this tweet up with quotes from that article that Sara just showed, that shows that even The Economist, which is not by any means a pro-China rag, right? But they even have to admit that China's green revolution is actually important. And here's a few quotes from that article. The scale of the renewables revolution in China is almost too vast for the human mind to grasp. At least it's too vast, apparently, for global north minds to grasp, because they're not used to actually doing things, but it's genuinely there. And China has become a new type of superpower, which one which deploys clean electricity on a planetary scale. I mean, I feel like, what is it trying to say there? That China is going to imperialize people by giving them clean energy? I feel like that's probably what they're trying to say. But China is providing ever greater amounts of clean energy capacity to the world at prices which are cheaper than any alternative, including coal and natural gas. And now this is really, really important for developing countries, even though you don't like that term, but it's important for a lot of global South countries that are incredibly impoverished, as we said, because of colonial practices. So to have a cheaper alternative and a more sustainable alternative. One of the interesting things that China is doing is actually this really big solar farm for Cuba. And that will greatly help a lot of their issues right now with U.S. sanctions. The consequence of U.S. sanctions is incredible, a lack of resources, cutting them off from any ways to make money, and that really does affect people's daily lives and whether or not they have access to things like electricity. So that is kind of an interesting development that China will be doing with Cuba that's supposed to be finishing at the end of this year. So we'll see how that actually helps Cuba in the long term. But, I'm excited I hope so, because when I interview people about Cuba, the U.S. sanctions and the crackdown, like we discussed with Matt, Cuba is definitely in the crosshairs of.
Yeah, we need to talk about Cuba. For sure.
Yeah, and so they need as much support as possible because they're really on the number one enemy list of the U.S. And so, so as you can see here, even The Economist is saying, this, even if climate change is not your priority, you should be excited at the prospect of cheap, abundant, clean energy and its promise to improve billions of lives in developing countries. The world needs what China has to offer. It should take it, which is kind of shocking for The Economist to say that, but I think it's kind of undeniable at this point. And the tangible effects of this is that not only did China's own emissions go into reverse for the first time, its clean energy exports in 2024 alone will also cut overseas CO2 by 1%, which is the article that you showed in the beginning. So it's a significant thing, for countries that are facing extreme pollution, but still need to, in some way, develop their own resources for protection or sovereignty. So here, it talks about all the solar panels, electric vehicles, etc., which, the US is completely falling behind because, again, Trump is going drill, baby, drill, and believing that climate change is a hoax, which the analysis on whether or not climate change is a hoax is largely irrelevant when you look at the tangible effects of corporations just throwing toxic waste into the river. You need.
It defies logic, doesn't it? It defies logic that we are constantly producing waste. Everybody knows plastic is waste, doesn't return to nature. It defies logic to call this as a hoax. Do you think the planet where we live without destroying it is the same that we live just daily destroying it? I mean, the amount of things we buy, we throw away, we waste, food waste, the interventions, the chemical interventions in nature to make it produce more, the animals in cages. Do you honestly think this has no impact? This only thing, this is not threatening to the planet? You need to believe in Santa Claus, and you need to believe that the resources are never to extinguish.
Right. Yeah,
you
exactly.
need to believe this. You need to believe it defines human basic logic. And sometimes I'm shocked when people want to say this doesn't exist. We are destroying constantly nature. You and I, people in the audience, we are
on the internet, and
we need to destroy less.
And also, we have to just kind of, we just have to kind of remember that these corporations have an incentive to lie and confuse people. A lot of times the criticisms, again, of these climate initiatives are criticisms of greenwashing. And greenwashing is different. It's, again, a covering of imperialist crimes, a covering of neo-colonial crimes. It's not actually, you know what I mean? It should be equated with the environmental issues that we're having.
Let me tell you something. This problem is different from other problems that we have because we have a ticking time. This is urgent. Why to think about a vision of future if we may not have one? The problem with environment is the urgency of it, the extent, the intensity, but what makes it priority is the need for fast speed intervention, not for tomorrow, not for today, not the delays practices that we have in the UK, the delay practices that we have in the US. We know how those governments operate, like in this fund to Brazil, the Tropical Forest Forever Fund. The UK said, we're going to look into it. We know what it means. It's a delay, procrastination practice. They won't say no, so it doesn't come in the headlines. They said a blunt no, but they will never implement this. This is modus operandi of UK institutions towards people's rights. People may remember Daniel Blake, the film from Ken Loach, where Daniel Blake is a poor man depending on his right, his social right. He's in a difficult situation. And he gets denied, and dies. And this is a true reality. It's not exaggeration in the UK. The Tories, the Conservatives, implemented a practice to deny disability benefits to people who could not go to work through a disability. And people, although they knew they had the right, will only have the right granted after the appeal, meaning for 6 months they won't be able to eat, they won't be able maybe to live somewhere, and a lot of suicides happen there. So this delay practice is necropolicies in many ways. Let people die because we are going, what they need now we're going to give in 6 months. Tell people to eat in 6 months time, see what happens. And this is the same practice they apply on environment in Britain. You can follow the headlines. It's everywhere. Well, we're going to postpone this. We're going to leave it for later. This is the standard modus operandi of hypocrisy, British hypocrisy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a good place to end on British hypocrisy. I mean, this is our new record, 3 hours and 16 minutes.
Oh my God. So thank you for watching, for staying with us. Don't forget to subscribe, like it, share with other people that you think would benefit from this discussion. Join the chat. And
I mean, some people are again talking about it being in English, and I just have to say, we're trying really hard to make sure that the auto dub will work for clips. The YouTube auto dub is not that great, so that's kind of the problem that we're having. But we're trying to get them out in like clips right after the live stream over the weekend. If we can figure out the auto dub, if it was working properly, then we could actually even upload the whole live. But 3 hours.
Yeah, let's try to do that. Let's try to do that.
And figure out. But thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you everyone.
A lot of people from Brazil came to say hi, which is really nice, and I hope most of them.
Very nice. And I have to say, Ileana, I will finish in a very hopeful note. The Yanomami territory, when Bolsonaro, the far-right Brazilian president, got into power, 20,000 miners invaded that territory. and it became a really industrial scale mining. Yeah. Lula government came and made the disintrusion process. I went to see the disintrusion. It is a total respect to the sovereignty of the Yanomami people. They built the first Brazilian indigenous territory on demand of the Yanomami people, and they have shamanic rooms, they have hammock rooms. It's the vision of an ancestral future. You know, how they project themselves to be in the future, how their dreams are, and now their territory is fully protected. I've seen how they rescue a Yanomami lady in the middle of the night with the military and took her to a hospital to save her life. I've seen children playing, children eating. So it is possible. It is possible. Another world is possible. Don't believe it. People say no. Defy them. Push back.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you, Sara. Thank you. And just want to say thank you. Thank you for popping in because of Matt Kennard. Subscribe, shared, and like. Thanks to Ode to John Triddle. Hopefully Matt did bring in some new people indeed. But thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next week. Right? Bye.
Bye.